Welcome to Fusion Fantasies, where I turn the light novels I love into audiobooks free, copyright safe, and made for you to enjoy. No frills, just stories. Got a novel in mind? Drop your suggestions, and it might just become the next audiobook. Now, let's dive in. Chapter 1. Chapter 1, The World of Reincarnation, the Beginning of Everything. Dear students, have you all memorized the rules of reincarnation? On the reincarnation square, a middle-aged man wearing glasses swept his gaze across the faces of the young men and women before finally stopping on one person. He Chuan, recite it once. He Chuan took a step forward and walked out of the crowd. Under everyone's gaze, he pondered for a while before replying. The four main points of the reincarnation rules. 1. No matter how many years you spend in the reincarnation world, the time flow in the main world will always be fixed at 168 hours. You don't have to worry that things will change after coming back from reincarnation. 2. Any performance of a reincarnator in the course of their life will affect the evaluation points. Under normal circumstances, the higher the achievement of the character in the world, and the more exciting the life, the more evaluation points will be obtained, and the rewards will be more generous. 3. The reincarnator can use temporary talents purchased. The specifications are not limited, but the first time of reincarnation can only use one. If the reincarnator carries multiple temporary talents without permission to reduce the difficulty of the reincarnation, the evaluation points will be cancelled. 4. This is the last and most important point. Under any circumstances, you are forbidden to reveal your identity as a reincarnator to the people of the reincarnated world in any form. As He Chuan spoke, he looked at the crowd. If you violate these points, it may lead to an irreversible disaster. All the responsibility will be borne by you personally. Very good. The teacher nodded in satisfaction. He Chuan had always been the best student in his class, and as expected, he did not disappoint him. The rules of reincarnation had only been issued for a few minutes, but he had already easily picked out the core part. This observation ability could not be found among all the students in the school. He was definitely a top student. It was a pity. This was a reincarnation world. Scores did not mean anything. Only reincarnators were the true rulers of this world. Everyone had the chance to become a reincarnator. Through the first time of temporary reincarnation opportunity that they received when they become adults, they received the reincarnator seal. With the help of the reincarnation square, they could enter all kinds of strange worlds and play the specially designated role of a background character. Every action of the temporary reincarnator in the world would affect the final evaluation point. The evaluation point determined the system rating when leaving the reincarnation world. Only those who had reached grade B and above could become eternal reincarnators and continue to grow. Reincarnators possessed abnormally powerful powers. Only they could withstand the strange creatures of this world. It was exactly because of this that reincarnators were the most dazzling existences in this world. Even if they had done something heinous, even if they had killed an entire town of ordinary people, the ordinary courts were not qualified to judge them. They stood at the top of the pyramid, detached from everything else. Right now, the hundreds of students in front of him were facing the challenge of the reincarnation assessment. For ordinary people, this was their only chance. It was easy to get, but was not easy to grasp. In the eyes of the teachers, even He Chuan, who had a lot of theoretical knowledge, would find it difficult to get high marks. This was because knowledge was of limited help in the reincarnation world. Without the help of a family background, the chances of passing the assessment were very slim. How much help would the temporary talent provide? For example, those who could change the reincarnation's pattern, such as born in a wealthy family, or gifted in cultivation. Or those who gave more opportunities, such as reincarnated once in the reincarnated world without being forced back to the main world, or reset the reincarnated world. As long as they had it in their hands, even if they ran into a world with top difficulty, there was still a possibility of achieving a B grade. However, the prices of these talents were too expensive. It was simply not something that a child from a poor family like He Chuan could afford. Even the teacher in charge could see what would happen to such an outstanding student in the future. Driven by the enslavement of the reincarnators, their status was even inferior to that of their pet dogs. They worked hard for daily necessities and earned a meager amount of money. This was the only outcome, there was no other way out. After all, in a place where there were no moral and legal restrictions, ordinary people could only cower in the darkest corner and struggle for their lives. It could be said that this reincarnation determined their future. He could not help but sigh. Although he did not want to see his students end up like that, this was the survival law of the world, and he could not change anything. The homeroom teacher shook his head and said, "Everyone has heard what He Chuan said. You should all know what to do and what not to do in your first reincarnation, right? Understand?" Several hundred people said in unison. The homeroom teacher placed his hands behind his back and looked at a huge aqua blue ball in the middle of the square. He said softly, "Since that's the case, then everyone should prepare to go." As soon as she finished speaking, hundreds of people left one after another. He Chuan and everyone else arrived outside the reincarnation square and placed their palms on the huge ball of light. The aqua blue ball of light immediately shot out a dazzling ray of light and wrapped around his body. The reincarnation seal on his body resonated, and an empty voice sounded in his mind. Retrieving target's identity. Connecting with the characters of the reincarnation world. Connected successfully. The world you are about to descend into is Parallel City. Do you want to receive the background information? Am I so lucky? He Chuan had never expected that he would be reincarnated into such a world. According to the knowledge he had learned from school, Parallel City, Parallel Ancient Times, and the martial arts continent were the least difficult ones. They usually didn't have particularly high power systems. Whether it was technology or martial arts, their best strength was very limited. A level higher one, such as Anno Data Annotation ID equals B89A30A6F9B430A2A1EC2BC47348440 Spiritual Energy Recovery World / or Anno Data Annotation ID equals A91180437D531759A40C2A2FC93B89 Supernatural Ability Awakening World / Anno could easily destroy any medium-level reincarnators by sending these lower-tier civilians. Other than that, the more difficult worlds were the fantasy and immortal cultivation worlds. Here, the cultivators who had reached the peak of perfection were able to break away from the shackles of the native planets, grasp all kinds of laws, shatter the void, and explore unknown secrets. The primitive society could also belong to this category. It was more special and did not have a fixed difficulty. The primitive society in the cities was the primitive people. The difficulty was also very low. However, if it was the primitive society in the fantasy world, it would be a fight between immortals. After all, this was the period when the power of heaven and earth was at its peak. No matter how bad one's talent was, they would still be filled with the energy in the air and become a powerhouse. The difficulty would be raised to the maximum. Living in such a world, one would have to worry about whether there would be any big shots fighting over resources outside even if they went to the toilet. The aftershocks of the battle would shock one to death. However, this wasn't the most difficult part. The ultimate difficulty of this world was the terrifying recovery world that could cross dimensions, as well as the futuristic world where science and technology had developed to the extreme. These two worlds each had their own unique characteristics. The only similarity was that the difficulty was unimaginable. The knowledge recorded in the books was very little, and only a brief overview was used. The 4 types of difficulty were all-encompassing, and if broken down, there were probably tens of thousands of them. To be able to randomly arrive at a parallel city world was really lucky to the point of exploding. Annotation style equals display, none, OL class equals Tynum sanitation container Lee data annotation ID equals B89A30A6 Fa9B430082812EC2BC47348440 refers to type of story that have a main protagonist with supernatural ability or powerful cultivation / Lee data annotation ID equals A91E8043731759A40C2A2 C93B89 refers to story like awakening in ability in apocalypse world and such / Lee /OL / annotations. 2 Chapter 2 Chapter 2 Self-Esteem. Even though He Chuan was very lucky, he did not feel proud and complacent. He still decided to be down to earth and first understand the background of the world. Receive. Exporting data. Waiting for verification. Verification complete. Please take a look. He Chuan immediately read it carefully. The world's background was very long, and the content was also very extensive. From astronomy and geography to laws and regulations, it was incredibly complete. After reading through all of this information, He Chuan came back to his senses. He already had a preliminary understanding of the world he was about to reincarnate into. However, at the moment, he did not know what role he was going to play and what family background he will have, so he did not have any plans. The other students had already gone to buy temporary talents. This was a huge help. Sometimes, when one was reincarnated, there was a slight difference in the evaluation points, and when the calculation was done, the evaluation level could be raised to another level. It was possible that those who could not pass the assessment would be able to reincarnated successfully. Unfortunately, he did not have the money. So he did not think about it. When the homeroom teacher saw that He Chuan was the first to return, he could not help but ask. He Chuan, why are you back so soon? You didn't buy a temporary talent. He Chuan shook his head, talent is too expensive, I can't afford it. My family still has to leave some money for food. This was an expected answer. The homeroom teacher sighed. He originally thought that the He Chuan family would sell everything they had to fight for a glimmer of hope for this only son to be reincarnated. He did not expect his family to be so poor. Then do you know which world you would be reincarnated to? Yes, my luck is good. It's Parallel City. City. The homeroom teacher raised his eyebrows in surprise. He did not expect that the best student in his class would meet the simplest one among the tens of thousands of worlds with different difficulty levels. In this way, the probability of success in reincarnation was much higher. He weighed the pros and cons and finally took out a silver card from his pocket and handed it over. There are 10 reincarnation points in here. Although it's not much, take it and buy a talent for yourself. Reincarnation points were the currency of this world. Whether it was among the reincarnators or in the market for ordinary people, it could be used. The current exchange rate for 1 reincarnation point was 9 gold coins. 1 gold coin could probably cover the expenses of an ordinary family of 3 for 3 months. From this, it could be seen how valuable these 10 reincarnation points were. After all, the reward for obtaining a grade D reincarnation evaluation was only a few dozen reincarnation points. He Chuan felt a surge of warmth in his heart. The homeroom teacher had already taken quite good care of him to be able to take out such a portion. But he did not take it. He stubbornly shook his head and said, "Teacher, I want to pass the evaluation with my own efforts." Sigh. You child. The homeroom teacher sighed again and did not insist. He knew He Chuan's character. He was like a stubborn donkey, not to mention that he was especially self-reliant. If he said that he did not want it, it was definitely not because he was embarrassed, but because he really did not want it. Just leave it like that? The homeroom teacher felt that it was not possible. Regardless of whether it was for He Chuan or for himself, this favor was very necessary. Once He Chuan became a reincarnator in the future, he would definitely remember this favor. So, why not? It would be a short-term investment. It would be a piece of cake. But how could he make him accept it? After thinking carefully for a while, he got an idea. A young and inexperienced young man like He Chuan would definitely not know how to reject a girl. He just needed to find an outstanding-looking female student, pretend to have a crush on He Chuan, and help give him the reincarnation point. Most importantly, if He Chuan really succeeded in reincarnation and his status rose, this fake crush might even turn into a crush that he admired. Who knows, it might even become a marriage. Killing two birds with one stone. The homeroom teacher felt that his plan was perfect. Once he thought of it, he immediately do it. He took out another card worth 50 reincarnation points from his wallet and immediately began to act. Not long after, the students in the class returned one after another. Most of them were sighing with complicated expressions. It was estimated that the world they were going to be reincarnated in was very difficult. Even if they had a temporary talent, they would not have much confidence in passing the test. Only a few people had smiles on their faces. During the conversation, they proudly revealed the place where they were about to be reincarnated. They were two parallel cities in a martial arts continent. Many people were very envious of them. They were trying to get closer to them at this time. They thought that if they didn't become reincarnators within an hour, they could still cling to them. He Chuan was the only one who didn't feel sad or happy. He stood on the side and watched everything quietly. This was a cruel game of survival of the fittest. Even at the lowest level world, the probability of passing the assessment was still less than 1 in 10,000. There was no point in fawning over others now. He had no interest in doing such a thing. At this moment, an announcement came from above the square. All examinees of the class, please enter the reincarnation square in an orderly manner. Students, please carry the reincarnation seal with you and open the assessment yourself. He Chuan clenched his fists slightly. The assessment had begun. The homeroom teacher rushed over at this moment. After wiping the sweat off his forehead, he said, "Everyone, you heard it. Students who have prepared their temporary talents can begin their reincarnation. Regardless of whether you can pass the assessment, as long as you do your best and don't leave any regrets, it's good enough." These words sounded invigorating, and everyone was eager to give it a try. Although the probability of passing the exam was very low, who wouldn't feel that they were the lucky ones? Hundreds of people left the scene one after another. He Chuan was about to go over to reincarnate when he was suddenly stopped by the homeroom teacher. "He Chuan, wait a moment." He Chuan turned around in confusion. "What's the matter, teacher?" "There's a girl waiting for you over there. She said that she has something to say to you." The homeroom teacher revealed an ambiguous smile and pointed in a direction. "There's no one around. You can have a good chat with her. You don't have to hurry about reincarnating." "I understand." He Chuan nodded and walked over according to the homeroom teacher's instructions. When he got closer, he realized that there was a girl standing there with outstanding looks and beautiful clothes. When He Chuan came over, his cold eyes only glanced at her from the corner of his eyes. Then, there was a hint of contempt in his eyes. "Teacher said you were looking for me." He Chuan's voice was calm. "What's the matter?" "He Chuan, right? In order to protect your poor self-esteem, your teacher asked me to pretend to be a secret admirer and give you 50 reincarnation points." The girl held a silver card between her fingers and waved it in front of him, revealing a sarcastic smile. "However, how can a commoner like you be worthy of such a big fortune? It's impossible for you to pass even if you buy a temporary talent." He Chuan was expressionless. So, these reincarnation points should be used on people who are more suitable for it." The girl put the card into her bag. "As for whether you want to tell your teacher about this, I don't care. When I become a reincarnator, he will know who is the most correct choice." With that, she threw 2 gold coins on the ground. The girl's attitude was arrogant and unquestionable. "Now it's a deal. I'll buy this card with money. It's more suitable for you to have a few days of a carefree life with them, you poor idiot." He Chuan didn't even look at it. Without hesitation, he turned his head and walked toward the reincarnation square. What a nut! Chapter 3 Chapter 3, First Reincarnation, 20 Years of Lifespan. Although 2 gold coins were a lot, compared to the reincarnation point, they were insignificant. This was a daylight robbery. Good-looking doesn't mean good-hearted. This is the kind of person that they called a beast in human form. He Chuan silently clenched his fists. Looking at her expensive clothes, she would actually rob a poor person like him. No, it was inappropriate. To be more precise, it was forcibly seizing. Although he didn't intend to accept the gift from his teacher, it didn't mean that he didn't care. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't angry at such behavior. But there was nothing he could do about it. Judging from the girl's gorgeous clothes, she must have been born into a rich family and had a certain background. This was a world where the strong preyed on the weak. Let alone possessing the things of the weak, even if the strong killed the weak, no one would spare a second glance. I must become stronger to prevent such a thing from happening again. He Chuan shook his head and took a deep breath. He did not take this small episode to heart anymore. Although he was not afraid of facing the darkness of this world, the most important thing for him at the moment was still the reincarnation assessment. There was no need to waste time on such a thing. He came to the reincarnation platform again and touched the light ball. This time, what appeared in He Chuan's mind was no longer the world's information, but the question of whether he wanted to undergo reincarnation. Yes. He did not hesitate. Then, with a flash of light, He Chuan was engulfed by the endless light and the world spun. He felt as if he had fallen into the air, like a lone boat floating in the sea, drifting with the waves. After a long time, accompanied by a cry, he opened his eyes and found himself in a place that looked like a hospital. Next to him was warm skin. When he looked up, he saw a young and beautiful woman hugging him and looking at him with a loving gaze. Hints related to reincarnation appeared in his mind. Character background: you were born into a well-off family. You were diagnosed with some strange disease by the hospital. The activity of brain cells is dozens of times more than normal people, but your body will fall into intermittent paralysis due to various complicated reasons. The present medical level is unable to treat it. According to experts, due to the limited number of brain cells, you will not live past the age of 20 due to the premature and large consumption of highly active brain cells. This disease was named after you. The first patient with He Clan's syndrome appeared in this world. Your family did not treat you badly for this reason. Instead, they gave you double the care and care. He Chuan blinked his eyes. As expected of the reincarnation test. Even if it was the world with the lowest difficulty, it would still give you a hellish start. You won't live past 20 years old. What kind of concept was this? This meant that if He Chuan wanted to increase his score, he had to have some achievements before the age of 20. If he wanted to reach B class, he had to be worth at least a few $100 million and have a certain social status. In this era where people were about to turn 30 after finishing university, it seemed a little unrealistic. He had a headache because of this. While you were thinking about what you should do in the future, you awakened the deduction system. System? He Chuan was not unfamiliar with this concept and quickly understood it. The introduction of this system was very simple. It could deduce the direction of all things. The specific application was also very simple. When the young woman in front of him lifted up her shirt and carried him in front of her, He Chuan had a thought, and the corresponding notification appeared in front of him. You accept breast milk, receive sufficient nutrition, no accidents happen. You reject breast milk, due to the mother's lack of experience, resulting in the mother did not deal with the increased amount of breast milk in time. It eventually led to a series of diseases, leaving behind irreversible consequences. He Chuan's eyes lit up slightly. Divination? This was equivalent to being a seer, allowing him to know in advance the outcome of his decision. There was nothing much to say, he could completely change his fate at the crucial moment. Even if it was compared to top-tier temporary talent, it was not inferior at all. However, he was not complacent because of this. The system's ability could be big or small, but the specific effects would still depend on how he uses them. If he did not have a good plan for the future, this lifespan of less than 20 years would still be the biggest stumbling block in this assessment. I must find a cure for this disease. He Chuan set a goal in his heart. However, he still had to live the life in front of him now and play the role of a good baby. As the warm breast milk fell into his stomach along his esophagus, He Chuan gradually fell into sleep. Children were generally lethargic. Not long after, his mother was discharged from the hospital and brought him home with his father, starting a peaceful life. He Chuan slept for 18 hours a day. Usually, during his waking hours, he would constantly use the deduction system to explore the potential of his body. You tried to walk, but your bones were too soft to bear the weight of your body, so you broke your bones. You crawled carefully and paid attention to the ratio of the force applied to your hands and feet as you moved. You successfully moved a small distance. You tried to speak, but because your vocal cords were not fully developed, you failed. After repeated deductions, He Chuan grew very quickly as an infant. As time passed, the couple gradually discovered the uniqueness of their child. Their baby never cried. And a few days after birth, he could use his limbs to crawl for a short distance. Life was very regular. Every 4 hours, he would crawl to his mother's side, pick up his shirt with his little hands, and suck milk to feed himself. He was very sensible, more disciplined than an adult, and even knew how to comfort others' emotions. Sometimes he would wake his parents in their sleep at night and act cute with pitiful eyes. A few months later, the child was even more reassuring. He was able to take care of his own daily life at this time. He could even communicate fluently with adults in complete sentences, and he would say whatever he needed in advance without causing trouble for his family. Compared to babies his age who were still learning about the colors and sounds of the world, he had already begun to explore the world with his parents. This kind of advanced behavior made the baby's parents very surprised. They could not help but take little He Chuan to the hospital. This examination was incredible. The doctor found that little He Chuan's brain was different from normal people's. The activity level was dozens of times higher than normal people. The reason why he could walk and speak faster than a child his age was because of this reason. His brain activity was high enough, and his learning efficiency also increased. When the parents heard this, they were extremely happy. They thought that their child had extraordinary talent. Perhaps if they nurtured him carefully, he could become the next Einstein. Chapter 4 Chapter 4, Little Genius, Grand Dreams. Therefore, in the future, they would take care of little He Chuan more, and they would try their best to satisfy any request. When he was 1 year old, under continuous deductions, He Chuan was able to talk and sang. He completed the transformation from crawling to running and began to expand his range of activities. 2 years later, he became a famous little genius in the community. He displayed extremely outstanding talent in chess and mathematics. He defeated all the old men and primary school students in the community. There was no match for him. In terms of mathematics, it was not a big deal. The best result was that he solved a junior high school level mathematical Olympiad question after reading the question. His opponent was a 6th grade top student, also a little genius. He was only a few seconds slower than He Chuan to get the answer. Even though there was a difference of 9 years in age, this result was obviously unworthy of He Chuan's brain cells, which were dozens of times more active. After all, his lifespan was only 20 years. 3 years was equivalent to 1/7 of his life. However, he was truly invincible in chess. No matter what kind of chess game he played, no matter how many people played against him, it was an instant kill. That's right, instant kill. Usually, other people would spend tens of seconds or even a few minutes thinking about their next move. In his hands, it was a 1-second move without any hesitation. Moreover, his style was fierce. Every move was a hidden killer move. As long as the opponent was slightly careless, they would lose. In the community, there was once a retired professional chess player who played a game with little He Chuan. In the end, he admitted defeat in less than 2 minutes and said that he would never play chess again, which shocked everyone. It was hard to imagine that a 3-year-old could do such a thing. It was also at this time that a message appeared from He Chuan's reincarnation seal. Life experience increased, evaluation points increased. I didn't expect there to be unexpected gains. He Chuan's original intention was to familiarize himself with the application of the deduction system. In the end, he obtained the evaluation points by accident. However, there was a price to pay for this process. Every time he overused his brain, his body would experience a small amount of discomfort. At first, only a portion of his fingers was numb and could not be controlled. After a few months, it became that his entire palm had lost consciousness. Fortunately, he would recover after resting for a while. It seemed that this illness was not particularly torturous. At present, his achievements were still very few. He had to continue working hard. The deduction system should not be used only for trial and error. This was the experience He Chuan gained after repeatedly deducing. His highly active brain cells could have the multi-threaded computing ability like a computer. At the same time, he could analyze countless possibilities. If he added the trial and error function of the system, he could think of a way to combine them. Perhaps, it would have a good effect on knowledge learning. He Chuan was a man of action. It was also from this time that he often begged his parents to take him to the library to read and study. Originally, the young couple did not intend to agree. No matter how smart their child was, it was impossible for him to understand words without going to school, right? After all, speaking and reading were two different things. Moreover, they were also busy with work and could not spare time. In the end, He Chuan did something that everyone did not expect. He actually ran away from home and left the community alone one morning. When his parents came home from work in the afternoon and did not find their child, they were terrified. Fortunately, there was a note on the desk with an address written on it. "It's time to lock this brat in the kindergarten. Let the teacher keep an eye on him." Father He crumpled the note into a ball and threw it into the trash bin next to him. At first, he thought that this child was a relief, but now it seemed that he was the most worrisome. Mother He didn't say anything. She quickly put on her shoes and went out to take a taxi. When the two of them found He Chuan in the corner of the library reading a medical book on the field of brain cells, they were both angry and shocked. How could a 3-year-old kid do such a thing? It was one thing if he dared to go out alone, but he ran out just to come to the library to read? What was even more ridiculous was that he was not reading a comic, but a professional book that most people could only understand the words but could not understand the meaning. At first, they thought He Chuan was just reading for fun. However, when the couple got closer and saw the paper filled with fine drafts on the table next to them, they became confused again. What are these symbols? Can someone explain? Are they copied or scribbled? He Chuan noticed his parents coming and smiled at them cutely. Then, he raised the 2 thick books with great difficulty. "Dad, Mom, I want to borrow these 2 books to read at home. Is that okay?" Father He pretended to be angry. "You still have the nerve to smile. Do you know how worried we are when you run out by yourself? Don't be angry at him." Mother He glared at him and turned to hug He Chuan. She said gently, "Baby, don't do this next time, understand? It's very dangerous." He Chuan nodded his head vigorously and decided not to leave any notes next time. He would read them secretly. If he told his parents that he was really reading these books, they would definitely not believe him. After all, even an adult would not be able to read these highly specialized books. However, He Chuan was different. He had a system. By using deduction to verify the various theories in the books, not only would the accuracy be guaranteed, but the deduction process would also appear in his mind, so much so that it would become a point of knowledge that could be absorbed. His learning efficiency was extremely fast. The brain cells that were active enough could also record all these things, allowing him to draw multiple inferences from one example. However, a deduction was ultimately just deduction. Medical research always had to be combined with clinical experiments. He Chuan soon fell into a bottleneck. He needed to do experiments to assist in verification. Moreover, as he gained more knowledge, there would be more and more such experiments. But how could medical experiments be done at will? Not only did they need extremely expensive equipment, they also needed a large amount of precious materials. At present, only the world's top scientific research institutions had such conditions. It seems that I have to find a way to enter the top institutions at the age of 10. Oh no, if I can, I have to enter the top institutions earlier. He Chuan silently clenched his fists. He was now racing against time. He had to learn by himself in the limited time he had, and make a name for himself. It was too difficult. Even with the system, he was not 100% sure. The two parents did not know that their baby had a grand idea in his head and was planning to take him home. At this moment, an old man suddenly came over. "Excuse me, sir and madam." Chapter 5. Chapter 5, I want to skip grades. Father, he sized him up. This person looked kind, and there was a gentle and amiable feeling between his brows. He looked like a person who had taught for many years. He couldn't help but ask in a gentle tone, "What's the matter, sir?" "I'm a professor at Concord Medical School." "You must be this child's father." The old man smiled gently and said, "I don't mean any harm. I just want to know who wrote the things on the paper on the table." The child just randomly drew them. "Why?" "Father," he was a little confused. The old man was stunned for a moment. He looked at He Chuan in disbelief. "It was written by the child? It wasn't taught by you?" He confirmed again. "I can't even understand these things, how can I teach it?" "Father," he pinched He Chuan's little face, "Baby, what did you write again?" "Nothing. I just saw the unsolved problems in the book and the hypothesis put forward by the original author. I felt that he was too childish, as if he hadn't used his brain before, so I tried to prove him wrong." He Chuan said in a childish voice. It turned out that he was completely wrong. The old man's expression was dull. Father, he and mother, he were also stunned. Did this child know what he was talking about? Yes, he was completely wrong. He was completely wrong. The old man smiled bitterly and his voice was filled with disappointment. "I didn't expect that my years of research would be completely overturned by a child today. Sigh. I have let down my teacher and my students who respect me." "Ah!" The two parents were shocked. This old man was the author of the book? In their eyes, someone who could compile and publish a book with such professional knowledge was definitely a great master in the field. Regardless of whether they knew him or not, he was worthy of respect. Moreover, from what he said, his son's scribble was correct? And he had overthrown his theory? The old man was silent for a long time before he looked at He Chuan. "Little friend, can you tell uncle how you came up with this? Use your brain to think, what else can I think?" He Chuan looked at him in confusion, his clear eyes seemed to be asking a question back. "Was it very difficult to use your brain to think about these things?" "This." The old man could not help but be speechless. This was indeed the most essential reason. Some people were called geniuses because they had intelligence and a way of thinking that was beyond the reach of ordinary people. They could achieve higher achievements in their fields at an earlier age. Obviously, he had met one today. And he was definitely a genius among geniuses. However, if he told his students that a child who looked only a few years old had solved a problem that had troubled him for 30 years, no one would believe him, right? The old professor shook his head. If people hadn't seen it with their own eyes, who would believe it? He Chuan's manuscript was very precious. It was not an exaggeration to call it the cutting-edge knowledge in this part of the medical field. With the permission of He Chuan and the nod of his parents, the old professor took the manuscript away, organized it, and published it. It was signed by He Chuan. As a result, it caused quite a stir in the field. Many related medical experts went to the old professor to ask who He Chuan was and how he could have such profound insights. When they learned that He Chuan was only a 3-year-old child, everyone was shocked and triggered a new wave of enthusiasm. Although most people did not believe that such a genius would exist, the old professor did not need to make up such a story to deceive them, so the name of He Chuan as a child prodigy gradually spread. However, this topic was not popular to the extent that it went out of the circle. After all, there was no real product. No matter how good the theory was, it could not make the public have an impression of it. Therefore, He Chuan's life was still very dull. Every day, he would either read a book or sleep. But his parents began to worry about him going to school. Originally, father he wanted He Chuan to stay in kindergarten. However, mother he did not think that was necessary. Their own child could even solve the problem that had troubled the professor for many years, so what was the point of going to kindergarten? That was a complete waste of time. After all, it was only a place for school education. Father he did not bother about this anymore and began to use his connections to think of ways to get He Chuan to study in primary school. This matter was a little troublesome. It was similar to skipping grades and required school assessment. Moreover, he had missed the start of the school season, so He Chuan's school schedule was delayed by a year. During this time, He Chuan did not sit around. He went to the library every day and read most of the books in it. A year passed in a flash. At the age of 4, He Chuan easily passed the skipping test and officially became a member of the primary school. Of course, he did not come here to study. If he were to count the time when he graduated, he would be more than 10 years old at that time, and half of his life would be wasted here. So, on the first day of school, when the homeroom teacher asked all the children to go up to the stage to introduce themselves and say their dreams out loud, He Chuan had sneaked into the principal's office alone. "Uncle Principal, I want to skip grades." The principal put on his glasses and smiled gently. "Your name is He Chuan, right?" He recognized the child who was known as the prodigy at a glance. He Chuan nodded vigorously. Standing behind the desk with only half of his head exposed, it was difficult for him to make eye contact with the adults. The principal moved a chair for him and carried it up. "Tell me, why do you want to skip grades?" "The course is too simple." "It's a complete waste of time," He Chuan said bluntly. "I want to go to the 6th grade so that I can enter junior high next year." The principal could not help but be dumbfounded. At first, he thought that He Chuan wanted to jump to the 2nd or 3rd grade. To be honest, if this little guy insisted, he would give him 2 questions to test him. If he could pass the test, he would agree to it. After all, it was not the first time that such a student had completed the 1st or 2nd grade of elementary school by himself in kindergarten. Although He Chuan was a little young, it wasn't that he couldn't understand. From the time he started reading at the age of 3, 1 year was enough time for the prodigy to understand the 2-year elementary school curriculum. But this request to jump from the 1st grade to the 6th grade was too outrageous. No matter how talented he was, he wouldn't be like this, right? Learning the entire elementary school curriculum in 1 year? The principal had never heard of such a case in all his years of education. He thought He Chuan was just fooling around and didn't take it to heart. He immediately called the teachers in his class to bring the little guy back. He Chuan still wanted to resist, but the little guy was too weak and couldn't resist at all. But he still said something unconvinced. "Principal, just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean no one cannot do it." "Who says I can't do it? Do you dare to bet with me?" The principal was so angry that he laughed. Coincidentally, a few students outside rushed in to report. These were the 6th grade elites who were about to participate in the National Primary School Olympiad math competition. They were the group of people with the best math scores in the entire school. Originally, he had planned to personally come up with a question to give them targeted training. It just so happened that Chuan, this child prodigy, felt that he could jump to the 6th grade and was still so persistent. He would not give up until he was defeated. Then, he would take this opportunity to let him compete. Therefore, the principal directly came up with 3 mathematical Olympiad questions. In order to let Chuan suffer, he also deliberately increased the difficulty. Some of the formulas could only be learned in junior high school. Chapter 6. Chapter 6, Rank First, the King of Primary School Student Olympiad Competition. Under the principal's deliberate mixing of ingredients, as expected, the problem became extremely difficult to solve. At least in the eyes of the group of 6th grade elite students, it was no different from a heavenly book. Each and every one of them were scratching their ears and cheeks, completely unable to think of a way to solve the problem. 10 minutes had passed, but their draft paper was still blank. Only Chuan did not sit down, nor did he start writing. After he finished reading the problem, he stood to the side and did not move. The principal thought that he had chickened out, so he could not help but laugh and tease, "Didn't you ask to jump to the 6th grade? Why don't you dare to do it when you see the problem? My legs can't move." Chuan frowned slightly. After a year of studying hard in the library, his condition seemed to have worsened. Now it seemed that the slightest use of his brain would cause his limbs to fall into short-term mobility disorders. The principal was slightly surprised and quickly asked about it. Only then did he learn that Chuan had a strange disease that caused his limbs to be intermittently paralyzed. He quickly carried Chuan to the sofa at the side and poured a glass of water. "If you feel very uncomfortable, Uncle will call your parents and ask them to take you to the hospital. It's an old problem. Just wait for a while." Chuan gently shook his head. "I'll do the questions first." After saying that, he picked up a pen and paper and quickly wrote down the answers to the 3 questions. In just 2 minutes, he had written down the answers to the 3 questions. He even wrote down a few alternative solutions and the core formulas and theorems that should be used. The principal took a look. Not bad, the result was right. Wait. Why are there some symbols here? Holy shit! Isn't this the university's formula? You must be joking. A 4-year-old child used the university's formula to solve a problem? He was shocked. He was completely dumbfounded. A few primary school students nearby saw the principal's expression and couldn't help but come over. The first way to solve the problem. So that was how it was. It was a formula that they hadn't learned before. No wonder they couldn't solve it. The second. What the hell were these symbols? Their expressions started to become the same as the principal's. It was just that the principal was well aware of the shock. And they were ignorant and confused. That afternoon, the principal took Chuan here and there. First, he went to his home and asked his parents for their opinion, saying that Chuan's IQ and brain power were far beyond ordinary people, he should not waste time in primary school, and should get a better and more elite education. This was a good thing, father he and mother he naturally would not refuse. The 2 young people were also very relieved to let the principal take their children away. Then, the principal drove Chuan to the municipality. The news that their school had a little genius was reported layer by layer, and the deeds that were investigated were shown. This incident caused a serious discussion in the Municipal Education Bureau. After a round of investigation, several meetings were held overnight, but still, no one could make the decision. There was no other reason. Chuan's experience was too shocking. He was only born a week and could already walk. He could talk and sing in 6 months. He started to talk to adults about his life ideals at the age of 1. He solved junior high school's Olympiad math problems at the age of 2. He defeated a professional chess player at the age of 3. At the age of 4, he looked through the entire library and produced a medical manuscript, which was still at the forefront of the field of knowledge. Such talent and ability cannot be described as genius. People believed that he was an alien who had been reincarnated in the wrong place. However, all of this was traceable. That was He Clan's syndrome that He Chuan suffered from. They could only attribute all of the causes to He Chuan's overactive brain cells. Only this could explain why He Chuan, who was self-taught and only 4 years old, used university formulas to solve problems. After a few discussions, the city leaders still did not dare to act rashly and immediately reported it to the provincial government. Soon, news came from above. They said that there was no need to rush to arrange He Chuan's future. Let him participate in the Olympics and see how he performed. The Olympics was held as scheduled. This was a national student gathering. Delegations from all over the world would participate in the competition. The competition was extremely fierce. If there was 1 point difference, it was possible to fall several places. The test paper was set by a well-known math education expert in the country, and it was much more difficult than the entrance examination. Moreover, the Olympiad Maths examination was not only about the proficiency of mastering the formula, the most important thing was still the student's ability to think logically. The process was the most important. Sometimes the result was right, the process was all wrong, and you did not get a single point. But if the process was right and the answer was wrong because of careless calculation, then only a small amount of points would be deducted. He Chuan had the deduction system, so it was not a problem at all in this aspect. Moreover, it was only a 6th grade question, so it was not difficult at all. When the examination papers were handed out, he was still the first to finish the paper and walk out of the examination room. When the results came out, several days had passed. He Chuan was waiting in the hotel that was arranged. The principal was the first to bring the news. He wore presbyopia glasses and could not hide his excitement. He pointed at a form that he was holding tightly in his hand. Full marks. In this Olympiad competition, He Chuan beat the 4 members of the Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen delegations who had also won the first prize. These were the celebrity delegations that had occupied the top of the rankings for many years. It had been a long time since they had changed. Who would have thought that they would be defeated by He Chuan alone this time? Although the team's ranking was held back by a few other students in their school and could not make it onto the list. But with this achievement of being the first in a single person's ranking was enough for the principal to put this honor on the school's bulletin board and publicize it for a few weeks. There was a banquet in the evening, which the Ministry of Education invited all the students who participated in the Olympiad competitions. When all the students saw that the person who got the first place was a kid who was not even half as tall as them, everyone was shocked. The leading teacher was dumbfounded. The big boss of the Ministry of Education was also dumbfounded. No one had expected it. The most inconspicuous person in the examination hall had now successfully stood in the most dazzling place, becoming an insurmountable mountain. Students who could participate in such a national competition were the most outstanding existences. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were geniuses. But at this moment, under the radiance of He Chuan, a 4-year-old child, they appeared to be extremely dim. Life experience increase, evaluation points increase. The familiar voice sounded again after a year. However, He Chuan knew that he did not need to wait so long to hear this news again. Chapter 7 Chapter 7, Writing Classics to Become Master of Literature and Art. There were many media at the awards banquet. What they liked the most was gimmicky reports. Soon, the news of the 4-year-old super child prodigy winning the Olympiad competition spread like wildfire under their promotion. The words He Chuan began to appear on television, in newspapers, and on the internet. Countless passers-by who accidentally saw this article were dumbfounded. This led to a round of discussion on what I was doing when I was 4 years old. As the saying goes, a layman watches a show, but an expert knows the ropes. Some experts and scholars also came forward and began to analyze the various physical, psychological, and social factors, showing how rare it was for a 4-year-old like He Chuan to win an Olympiad competition for a primary school student, and it was an event that could not be replicated. When an event was certified by the authorities, the credibility of the event also increased. At this time, He Chuan's value began to soar. The towels he used and the food he ate were all hyped up to sky-high prices. Many people held the idea that if my child eats the food they the genius eat, their IQ will also increase and rush to buy them. For a time, many products became in short supply. As the topic of He Chuan continued to rise, the country began to pay attention to this young genius. The relevant leaders directly went to He Chuan's family and began to discuss with his parents about He Chuan's future path. It was a waste for such a gifted child to walk the path of an ordinary person. Therefore, they expressed their hope that He Chuan could join the school of the gifted young, which was equivalent to directly attending a university's preparatory course. Not only was there no tuition fee, but there was also an additional scholarship of hundreds of thousands of yuan every year. When He Chuan saw this opportunity that came knocking on his door, he naturally would not let it go, so he agreed without hesitation. Thus, not long after, he went to Hong Kong alone. A slight increase in social status, the prodigy achievement has been unlocked. Evaluation points increased significantly. The reincarnation seal once again sent a notification. He Chuan smiled slightly. If the current situation continued, he might really be able to get a B grade. However, he did not become complacent because of this. Don't indulge when in favorable conditions, and you won't die at bad times. This was his motto. There was still a long way to go. If the trajectory of his life went downhill and he ended up begging for a living in his later years, his final score would also be lowered. Then, he went to understand the situation of the genius class. As the name implied, those who could stay in the genius class were all geniuses. The oldest was only 15 years old. The youngest was originally 13 years old, but now he was 4 years old, He Chuan. There was no deception here. Everyone was studying seriously. Everyone worked very hard and the atmosphere was very good. He Chuan was a little behind in the beginning. After all, he joined in the middle of the semester and his knowledge was limited. Although he had read all the books in the libraries, he was not omniscient. However, with the help of the deduction system, he quickly caught up and overtook them. In less than half a month, he became the best student in the genius class. Everyone looked at him in a new light. The higher UPS valued him even more and approved several 100,000 scholarships for him one after another. However, He Chuan was preparing to do scientific research to solve his illness. This amount of money was nothing at all. However, as a student, he could not get too much funding, so he could only think of ways to earn money himself. He Chuan looked at literary and musical works. In fact, other than his identity as a reincarnator, he had another identity, which was a transmigrator from Earth. At the moment, he had reincarnated into a parallel world on Earth, but there were still many big and small differences on the whole. Compared to the Earth he had once lived on, it was just that the general direction was similar. Both belonged to the low-level technology civilization. In short, although He Chuan was familiar with many of the epoch-making scholars that appeared here were similar to those on Earth, there were also some aspects that have been lost. The history of each country and the current world structure had changed. It was unknown which historical stage had changed and led to such a result. At the very least, there was no anno data annotation ID equals 46786176364BF5E42EFE269D23AC1 for the Lord of the Rings /anno. No anno data annotation ID equals 513F6317C4BC4E4352D910E6927B4F2E Harry Potter /anno. and no anno data annotation ID equals 97B0A0991939036A3716AE6C4D6919EA Song of Ice and Fire / anno in the literature history. In musical history, there was no anno data annotation ID equals 59659FE227FD55A5FFB81A56D9B0B361 Fate Symphony / anno by Beethoven, no The Magic Flute by Mozart, and no Nocturne by Chopin. It would be a pity if these famous and magnificent works of centuries did not appear in this world. He Chuan lamented. He suddenly had an impulse in his heart. He had to take these legendary things that leave a deep impression out of his mind so that the people of this world could understand the beauty of his past. There are many benefits to having such active brain cells. I can mobilize my memories as I wish. He Chuan chuckled and made a plan in his mind. I'll leave 10% of the copyright income as research funds. The rest will be donated to the poor areas. The money in the reincarnated world was useless anyway. It was enough to ensure that his research would be successful. If he donated it, he might be able to gain a good reputation and improve his evaluation points. So, why not? Therefore, in the next few years, He Chuan spent his spare time writing. To be more precise, he copied. It was just a little different. It was a product of his use of the deduction system to polish his writing. Many of the plots had a little change. Strictly speaking, Harry Potter was no longer the original Harry Potter, but the world was still the same world. It was a story that could make the people of this parallel Earth feel that it was not a story from far away. One by one, the classics compiled by his hands, caused a great stir in the outside world. Copyright cooperation and adaptation invitations came in waves. He Chuan directly counted the money until his hands went soft, and his bank card deposits directly increased from 6 figures to 12 figures. 120 billion RMB. It was roughly equivalent to $18 billion US. This was a fortune that ordinary people did not even dare to think about. He did not forget his original intention. He took out 90% of the money as promised and established the Charity Foundation for Poverty Alleviation. More than 100 billion were vaporized in an instant. But because of this, He Chuan became a world-famous great writer, great musician, and a great philanthropist. The life trajectory has changed. The Master of Literature and Art achievement has been unlocked, the evaluation points have increased significantly. The notification this time was slightly different, and the rewards were especially generous. According to his estimation, the now 8-year-old He Chuan should have already reached the B grade for reincarnations. However, He Chuan did not stop. Since things were developing so smoothly, he might as well rush forward and see where his limits were. Annotation style equals display, none. OL class equals Tynum sanitation container Lee data annotation ID equals 46786176364BF5E42EFE269D23AC14. The Lord of the Rings is an epic high fantasy novel by English author and scholar J.R.R. Tolkien / Lee data annotation ID equals 513F6317C4BC4E4352D910E6927B4F2E. Harry Potter is a series of 7 fantasy novels written by British author J.K. Rowling / Lee data annotation ID equals 97B0A0991939036A3716AE6C4D6919. Song of Ice and Fire is a series of epic fantasy novels by the American novelist and screenwriter George R.R. Martin / Lee data annotation ID equals 59659FE227FD55A5FFB81A56D9B0B361. Also known as Symphony No. 5 in C minor, OP 67 / Lee / OL / annotations. 8 Chapter 8 Chapter 8 Natural and Man-Made Disasters, Famine Strikes. At the age of 8, He Chuan's fame had reached its peak. He had been known as a prodigy and genius since he was 4 years old. Now, he was being sought after by countless people as a master of literature and art, and his fans were spread all over the world. This name had already been deeply rooted in the hearts of people all over the world. His deeds have become a more legendary existence than the protagonists in his novels. Everyone thinks that only legends can write legends. However, there is a deviation from what was known. All the legends heard in the past were in books. Now, there was a legend living in the world. This was what they feel was the most wonderful place. Many people came with admiration and curiosity. They wanted to see He Chuan. However, after he graduated from the genius class, he ignored the admission notice of many famous universities and completely disappeared. At this time, He Chuan had already started to solve the difficult scientific research problems. He started to research solutions to his illness. During the few years he studied in the genius class, he crammed a lot of knowledge. Now, he had a vague idea of the reason for his illness. It was very complicated. It couldn't be explained in 1 or 2 sentences. In general, it was a biological mystery. It wasn't easy to solve this mystery. Even with the help of the system, it was still difficult. Parallel Earth Calendar Year 2014. He Chuan was 9 years old and was running around doing experiments. The old professor he met in the library came when he heard the news. Using this relationship, he successfully rented a top laboratory in the country. During this period, he spent countless materials and experimented several times. Unfortunately, there was no progress on the topic related to He Clan's syndrome. However, there are some new breakthroughs in the study of biology as a whole, but for now, the field of application is unknown. Parallel Earth Calendar 2015. It is like the end of the world. Various natural disasters occur frequently in the country. Earthquakes, droughts, torrential rains, ecological collapse, and grain production had been reduced by 90%, and livestock farming has also been hit. Parallel Earth Calendar Year 2016. The country's grain reserves were in short supply. It fell into a period of poverty and weakness, and the economy was depressed. Parallel Earth Calendar Year 2017. He Chuan was also affected. He did not have enough food to eat, so he took the initiative to take advantage of a new breakthrough in biology. He stopped his original research and began to look for ways to cultivate high-yielding hybrid grain. This year, He Chuan was 12 years old. He looked a little mature, but now he was in a wheelchair. Due to the fact that scientific research consumed too much energy, he was now paralyzed for almost a third of the time every day. Now, he could only be pushed by his assistant on the streets that were no longer as prosperous as before. There were traces of disasters everywhere. The streets were dirty and messy. There was almost no place to stay. No one came to clean it up. He asked softly. Beside him, his assistant put on a mask for He Chuan, and at the same time, he replied, at the beginning, they had been sending people to clean it up, but not long after they were done, there was a flood. After that, there was a series of earthquakes. The disaster did not stop. Now, there are shortages of supplies and food everywhere. There is really no choice but to leave it alone for the time being. He Chuan nodded his head in understanding. His gaze swept across the street. There were not many shops that were open for business. There were only some temporary stations that distributed daily necessities. However, he did not see anything related to food. It seems that the problem is very serious. He Chuan sighed softly. Looking at the empty office building that reached into the clouds, he could not help but feel a little melancholic. The assistant pushed him and told him what had happened in the outside world in the past 2 years. The impact of this natural disaster was unprecedented. In the 2 years since the grain production was greatly reduced, the country had also made some moves. The number of imports that should be increased had also increased. The adjustments that should be made had all been adjusted, but the effect was always limited. After all, it was a large country with more than 1 billion people. The amount of food consumed every day was very frightening. It was unrealistic to rely entirely on import trade to solve the problem. Moreover, the impact of natural disasters was far beyond what can be seen. Natural and man-made disasters were always linked together. All kinds of disasters and the shortage of food supply have caused many people to fall into panic. At this time, who would still have the mood to work? The output has plummeted in all walks of life. The consequences were endless. Of course, the main problem was food. More than 1 billion people need to be fed. They don't have enough to eat every day, which was what needs to be solved. But the consequences of this natural disaster were very serious. It was no exaggeration to say that it has changed the environment of the land in the country to a certain extent. Large areas of the affected land were no longer able to grow the original crops. Now, even if they wanted to replant, there was no way. Unless they could develop seeds that were more adaptable and produced more, saving the people of the country from suffering. If I can solve this problem, there will definitely be a lot of evaluation points. He Chuan tried to stretch his body and found that his right hand had recovered. So he picked up his phone and made a call. I need an experimental plot. Over the years, as He Chuan's fame grew, he also got to know many people. Among them, there was no lack of high-level leaders of the state. The higher UPS attached great importance to such a talent like him. Naturally, they would not refuse this request. What surprised He Chuan was that the state seemed to attach too much importance to him. When he arrived at his destination, he found that he had not only taken over the experimental plot but also a professional R&D team was at his disposal. It was full of agricultural bigwigs, all of whom were full of glory. But now, they had become his subordinates. This honor was not something that ordinary people could have. Moreover, when the country was at its poorest, they had given him 30 million research funds. The leader said that no matter how much progress was made or how much money was invested, the country would give its full support. With such help, the experiment naturally went very smoothly. Hybrid rice A and B, the survival rate is less than 5%. Hybrid rice A and C, yield per anno data annotation ID equals B370DF6BAF928C0C27FB7231F787E46A mu/anno is less than 300 kg. Hybrid rice B and C, unable to adapt, develop, to the following types of land. Hybrid rice G1 and N7, perfect match. Looking at the results of the system's deduction, He Chuan did not need to do too many experiments to find the most suitable hybrid rice seed. The rest of the matters would be left to the group of agricultural bigwigs to do. In the end, in just half a year's time, the first generation of hybrid rice was bred, yielding 2,000 caddies per mu. One had to know that the maximum yield of ordinary rice growing in high-yielding fields was only less than 1,400 caddies. Now, the first round of cultivation had achieved a 50% increase in yield. As soon as this news was reported to the higher UPS, they were shocked. Was this a joke? Annotation style equals display, none, OL class equals Tynum sanitation container Lee data annotation ID equals B370DF6BAF928C0C27FB7231F787E46AA1 mu is equal to 1/15 of a hectare, around 0.165 acres/Lee/OL/annotations. 9 Chapter 9 Chapter 9, National Scientists' Achievements, New Viruses Sweep Across the Globe. How long has it been? Other research projects often take 10 to 20 years. Which one does not need a long period to accumulate experience, do trial and error, and ultimately achieve victory? They have even planned to sign very disadvantageous import treaties with other big agricultural countries in order to ensure that the people at the bottom of the food chain were not endangered by hunger. As a result, He Chuan, this brat, directly turned into a savior. How many months did it take? Although it seemed impossible, when the golden rice was placed in front of them, they had no choice but to believe it. In fact, He Chuan still felt that the progress was too slow. If it were not for the fact that plants had a specific growth cycle, he would have wanted to solve this problem in 10 days. But now he had no choice but to take it step by step. 2 months later, the second generation of fast-growing hybrid rice was introduced. It yields 3,000 caddies per mu. Although the taste was not very good, the requirements for the various values of the sown land were very low. In a word, the vitality was strong, the yield was high. It could completely be popularized on a large scale and solve the food problem. Not only that. In the next 2 years, Hechuan also found the first-generation hybrid varieties of other foods. They included sorghum, peanut, corn, wheat, and a total of 127 agricultural products. The results were remarkable. The research and development team compiled all of Hechuan's contributions into a book. It was published in the form of a thesis. The whole country was shocked. He was once again praised by countless people and stood in the most dazzling place. He received the highest Science and Technology Award, the Wolf Prize in Agriculture, the Breakthrough Prize in Life Sciences, and a series of other top awards. In October, he was awarded the highest honor in the country, the Medal of the Republic, and was named the Pioneer of Agricultural Hybrid Research. He became the most attention-grabbing news figure of the year. Social status has been greatly improved. The National Scientist Achievement has been unlocked. The final rating has been upgraded. Hechuan's goal had been achieved. At this moment, he had retired after winning merit and continued to focus on his research on He Clan's syndrome. However, the topic about him in the outside world had not ended because of this. This heroic feat of turning the tide and saving countless citizens from the disaster could be said to have added another thick stroke to his short 15 years of life. Many people began to understand Hechuan's life at this time. Although the details were few, each achievement and contribution made people feel as if they were looking up at a high mountain. Because they discovered that no matter what Hechuan did, he could achieve extremely high achievements in a very short time. This could not be described as genius. No words could describe his talent. This was a person who surpassed common sense and broke common sense. Who else in the world could compare with him? Over the next 6 months, all kinds of agricultural products entered the market one after another. With the replenishment of such a large amount of food, the people returned to the peaceful life of the past. Although from time to time they were also affected by natural disasters. But after having an unusually abundant supply of food, everyone no longer worried that they would not live to see the next day. But a bigger crisis was looming. A global outbreak of the virus. The source of infection was unknown. People infected with the new virus have terrible symptoms and high mortality rates. As a last resort, many governments have adopted a confinement policy to prevent the disease from developing. Hechuan's country has used a similar approach. But now, after the disaster, many places in the country have not had time to clean up the environment, and sanitation conditions were very poor. So, soon after the virus outbreak, the number of patients reached an alarming number of hundreds of thousands. The most terrible thing was that the disease has a short incubation period. During this period, there was no sign that you were infected. Because of this, the scope of the infection quickly expanded, and soon spread throughout the country. When Hechuan heard the news, it was already the second week of the epidemic. Worldwide, more than 20 million people were diagnosed and 4 million died. According to the outbreak cycle of the new virus, the remaining people were likely to die within this week. Countless experts and researchers were helpless against this. Because according to their research, the speed of mutation of the virus was astonishing. Moreover, the natural drug resistance was very strong. Ordinary drugs could not even alleviate the disease, and there was no possibility of treatment in the short term. According to speculation, even if the world's most advanced group of people were to work together day and night to develop a vaccine, it would at least take more than a year. But based on the current spread of the epidemic, not to mention a year, I'm afraid that in half a year, there won't be more than 1 million people alive on Earth. A month passed quickly. The Earth's population fell by 10%. It was just as they predicted. Conventional methods couldn't stop the spread of the disease. There were too many ways for this virus to spread. It was useless to lock yourself in your home. Mosquito bites and plant pollination could inadvertently infect people with the new virus. Once infected, it was no different from being sentenced to death. There was no way to effectively treat it with existing methods. The best medicine could only give people 2 more days to live. The people of the entire planet were in a life and death crisis. No one could maintain personal integrity. Under the shadow of death, despair and helplessness filled their hearts. In the lab, He Chuan was wearing a thick protective suit. He pressed a button next to him and sent over a dozen virus samples to be frozen. Then, he left the lab and entered the disinfection room. He cleaned himself 3 times before he walked out and sat on the sofa in the lounge. At this moment, a nerve that had been tense for a long time was finally released. However, what followed next were the limbs that gradually lost consciousness. He Chuan was already used to his current state. He lowered his head and bit the button on his collar. The development of the special medicine has been successful. Send someone to get the data. I can't move now. Soon, the door was opened by a group of researchers surrounded by soldiers. They saluted He Chuan in unison. Then, they followed the instructions and placed a stack of thick papers printed on the table into the safe. Take the computer hard drive as well. Inside is the result of my 5th test today. The virus mutation rate has been suppressed by the drug. He Chuan looked at them tiredly. As soon as the pharmaceutical factory is built, start production as soon as possible. You can decide how long the clinical trial period will be. My personal suggestion is to put it in large batches directly, and try to get everyone vaccinated in the shortest time possible. As he spoke, he raised his voice. This is a vaccine for the eradication, not prevention. The faster you move, the fewer people will die. Don't wait until the next round of virus mutation, understand? Don't worry, Comrade He Chuan. An old man bent his body forward and held He Chuan's hand. Leave the rest to us. I'll try to get them to skip some procedures that can be omitted. He Chuan nodded lightly and closed his eyes wearily. Chapter 10 Chapter 10, I Have a Dream. Parallel Earth Calendar Year 2020. 2 months after the outbreak of the new virus, the special drug was released. It was He Chuan, a well-known writer, musician, biologist, agricultural scientist, and many other honors. Independent research and development. After the results were released, the world was in an uproar. At first, there were some countries that did not believe it. After all, there were so many countries with better medical conditions, and their experts couldn't do anything about it. How could you get the special medicine out in such a short time? But as the number of cases in He Chuan's country decreased day by day, the major news started to report the situation, and when the people recovered, they were all speechless. Then, at this time, they filed a patent application with He Chuan. They were willing to pay a high price to obtain the information needed to make the vaccine. He Chuan did not refuse. A year later, the new virus disappeared completely. It became the second virus to be completely defeated by humans after smallpox. No one had expected it. After saving his own country's people, He Chuan saved the whole world. Social status has been greatly improved. The world-class scientist achievement has been unlocked. The final rating has been raised. It was also during this period that universities all over the world extended an olive branch to He Chuan. Harvard, Oxford, and Stanford were all among them. However, this time, they were no longer looking for him to be a student. Instead, they had invited He Chuan to be a visiting professor at their school. Other than that, the major scientific research institutions had also sent invitations. They were willing to allocate research resources and laboratories for He Chuan, in order to have a chance to communicate with He Chuan. However, He Chuan rejected everyone. Today, after receiving a huge amount of patent fees, he was worth more than $10 billion. He was already in the top 100 of the global Forbes wealth list. With so much money, it was enough to support him to buy all the top equipment. He no longer has the worry of not having money. He Chuan could finally devote himself to his research. He was now 16 years old. He was only 4 years away from the end of his life. His physical condition was getting worse and worse. With just a little bit of thinking or using the deduction system to calculate, it would not take long before he was paralyzed. He had to solve this problem as soon as possible so that he could continue his life and improve his final reincarnation score. 1 year later, He Chuan encountered a bottleneck. As he studied more and more deeply, he felt that science was more and more formidable. Some people said that the end of science was theology. Originally, He Chuan did not care about this. But when the bell of death was approaching, he was still troubled by numerous problems and was at a loss about the disease. He felt that this statement had a slight possibility. Could it be that He Clan's syndrome was really a trick that God used to play on him? His cells were tens of times more active than others, and there was also the intermittent paralysis of his limbs. It was clearly two completely unrelated bodily reactions. How did they come together? The more he thought about it, the more he could not understand. The deduction system also did not have an answer. After all, the deduction could only help him verify the process, not directly obtain the results. Otherwise, he could directly deduce how I should treat my disease, then everything will be fine. More than half a year has passed. He Chuan on a similarly boring night slumped on the sofa. No way. No way at all. From a theoretical point of view, this disease was completely unsolvable. There was a limit to the number of brain cells one can use in one's life. When all the brain cells lost their activity, as the host, he would definitely die. Whether it was transplanting other people's cells or suppressing the activity of one's own cells, even if these two methods were technically sufficient and could be realized, according to the deduction system's judgment, he would not live to be 20 years old. Is there a limit to the human body's genes? He Chuan clenched his fists. To be honest, although with his current social status and wealth, the final rating would definitely be above B. But if it ended just like that, He Chuan always felt a sense of unwillingness in his heart. He had a vague feeling that this illness of his was the key to opening a certain shackle. As long as he found a way to solve it, there would definitely be unexpected gains. A thought suddenly flashed through his mind. Who said that people have to die? Since the end of my disease is death, why don't I just modify the ending? When the time comes, will the existence of the disease still have an impact? If you can't get rid of it, just accept it. He Chuan's thinking changed very quickly. So, in the year 2023 of the parallel Earth calendar, when the world sent representatives to celebrate the 18-year-old He Chuan's coming of age, through live broadcasts by the media, he put forward a sensational point of view. I have a dream. I want to transcend birth, old age, sickness, and death. I want to make human civilization becomes immortal. I want to unlock the gene lock that restricts human life. The people sitting there were either high officials or top scientists. They never dreamed. One day, a genius who surpassed the wisdom of the century would be able to speak like a madman. Everyone was in disbelief. But everyone was silent again. No one mocked or questioned. If it were anyone else, even if it was a country's president or the top few people in the field, they would say the same thing. They would just treat it as if they were drunk and talking nonsense. But who was this person in front of them? He Chuan. The new virus that all the infectious diseases and biology bigwigs couldn't solve was defeated by him in a week. It seemed. This kind of ridiculous words, coming from his mouth, wasn't it believable? He Chuan's calm but extremely clear voice sounded again. I'm not that great. Perhaps you don't know, but I have a special illness. It keeps my brain working at a high speed, but it also takes away my life. Now, I've reached the end of my life. In another 2 years, this world will no longer belong to me. At this point, his voice paused. Everyone's heart also hung up. 2 years. It was neither long nor short. For a genius like He Chuan, there were too many things he could do. But for an ordinary person's life, it was too short. Moreover, he will only be 20 years old at that time. A 20-year-old young man, who had yet to experience the beauty of this world, was going to die just like that? However, I'm not pessimistic. Life will find its own way to flourish. Regardless of whether it's far away, regardless of the length of time, aren't we all doing the same thing now? Many people felt the same way. They had devoted all of their efforts to scientific research, regardless of the results, regardless of the gains and losses, in order to allow the human race to go further and further, allowing the continuation of civilization. These few words directly spoke to their hearts. He Chuan smiled indifferently. Everyone, now I want to be selfish for one last time. I don't have any salary for this research. All the funds will be invested in research and development. For you, it is definitely a decision of one-sided investment. Now, who wants to work with me? The first person to respond was the world's most authoritative and powerful laboratory. CERN, European Nuclear Research Council. Isn't it just money? We won't starve to death even if we earn less for 2 years. The 5 permanent representatives of the United Nations also expressed their support. After the banquet ended, an emergency joint meeting was held. Finally, the decision was made to recruit the top 100 scientists in various fields from all over the world. Plan Unlocked was launched. 11 Chapter 11 Chapter 11, Research and Development Bottlenecks, Tinder Operation. What would happen if the world's most cutting-edge scientists were called out? The answer was that a large number of cutting-edge scientific research projects were shut down. Huge losses would be incurred every minute and every second. Not only that, but some of the core scientific and technological secrets that they possessed might also be leaked because of this collaboration. The leaders of each country were not fools. They would naturally take precautions against this. After all, the leader of this scientific research project was He Chuan. Once it failed, the world would return to its original track 2 years later. No one wanted these secrets to be in the hands of their opponents. Signing a confidentiality agreement was the most basic thing. Apart from that, there were also a lot of regulations. He Chuan saw it, but he didn't stop them. He knew very well that not all of them gathered here for adoration. It was normal to have some personal thoughts mixed in. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they all had ulterior motives. After all, his value had been fully demonstrated over the years. Now that there were only 2 years left, everyone wanted to take advantage of him. There were many people who wanted to use this plan to get his help and expand their original research results. Although it's mutualistic, there's still a chance for you to volunteer. He Chuan didn't care about this. All he wanted was the key that could open the door. Under these conditions, the research and development began. This time, the goal was a field that everyone was unfamiliar with. What was the gene lock? How was it unlocked? What would happen after it was unlocked? All sorts of questions made everyone not know where to begin. Nor did He Chuan give the answer to this group of people. He directly applied the knowledge he had learned in the reincarnation school. He randomly gave an example of a low-level martial world that used genetic evolution as a powerful growth system. After describing it, he let them freely imagine. Imagination was always a magical thing. Everyone was different. In the end, all kinds of plans were submitted. Some wanted to devour the genes of other species to strengthen the human gene chain. At that time, humans could have the bite force of crocodiles, the arm strength of giant bears, and the jumping ability of kangaroos. It was equivalent to learning from each other's strengths. Some people wanted to use drugs to strengthen and mutate human genes. However, the direction of the mutation was a mystery. The person who submitted the proposal could not be sure. It seemed that they just wanted to try it out. The strangest thing was a genetic screening proposal. His goal was to build a human gene bank. It would record all the human gene strands. It would be graded according to the degree of excellence or inferiority. In the future, high-quality genes could only marry high-quality genes to ensure the stability of high-quality genes. There were countless such things. What He Chuan needed to do was to use the deduction system to judge the reasonability of these plans. After confirming, he would consider the subsequent development. In the end, a total of 74 plans were submitted, and He Chuan rebutted 71 of them on the spot. One of them included the one that divided people into 3, 6, and 9 grades. This was the most trashy proposal of all. What he wanted was to break through the whole, ignore the pros and cons, and solve the shackles of the human race as a whole. It was not a problem of 1 or 2 people or 1 or 2 races. This idea was relatively broad, and the scope was too comprehensive. So much so that it took a lot of time just to collect data. As the days went by, He Chuan's physical condition deteriorated day by day, but there was no progress in his research. For a time, people all over the world fell into a pessimistic mood. He Chuan's influence had unknowingly spread to every corner of the world. There were even voluntary organizations that worshipped him as a god. The last virus that swept the world had taken the lives of nearly 1 billion people. Among them were their relatives, friends, neighbors, and teachers. All of them had gone through life and death. He Chuan's existence was not an exaggeration to say that he was the savior of the world. It was a very painful thing to watch the savior slowly go into decline, but there was nothing they could do. The leaders of the various countries were even more anxious. If He Chuan died just like that, it would be a huge loss to the entire human society. It was also because of this. The United Nations held a second emergency meeting. They mobilized all the funds available to continue his life. It was a pity. He Chuan, who had a deduction system, could not even find a treatment plan. Even if the best medical team treated him regardless of the cost, what use would it be? Although the treatment alone costs hundreds of millions of dollars every day, the results were not satisfactory. It could even be said that not even the slightest effect had been achieved and all the money had been spent. There was no other way. The United Nations could only hold another emergency meeting. This time, everyone in the meeting room was silent. The President of the United Nations sighed heavily. Mr. He Chuan's existence is beneficial to all of us. At this time, we should put aside the differences and prejudice between our countries and focus on making plans for the future. He is the wealth of all mankind. He can't be divided. You all know very well that as long as he continues to live, our civilization will be able to make progress in a short period of time. After a few words, a few people in the hall whispered a few words, but they still did not express their opinions or suggestions. The conference room fell into silence again. Actually, they had no other choice. They were not scientific researchers, so they did not even have the right to talk about solving He Chuan's illness. No matter how many times this kind of meeting was held, the result would not change. The President of the United Nations was well aware of this. He pondered for a moment before saying, "Actually, I have a rather immature idea. If we really can't save him, the worst-case scenario would be the unfortunate death of Mr. He Chuan. If we can preserve his genius genes before this, of course, I'm referring to the descendants, then it would not be such a pity for the entire human race." Everyone seemed to have realized something. It seems like we should do that. Mr. He Chuan has been obsessed with research all these years, and it seems like he has never had a relationship. Since he has never even had a relationship, where would his descendants come from? Could it be that we are using artificial insemination? This idea is very good, but the premise is that Mr. He Chuan is willing to give you the seeds. I have talked to Mr. He Chuan several times. He is a very rational person. He should not accept your request. Why don't we recruit high-quality women aged 18 to 25 from all over the world and let them volunteer to be Mr. He Chuan's partner? There's still more than a year left. As long as he's not paralyzed in that aspect, it wouldn't be a problem for him to have a class of genius children, let alone one child. Who knows, there might even be someone with an IQ comparable to Mr. Hechuan. Why do I feel like you treat Mr. Hechuan like a seeding machine? That's a good thing. Mr. Hechuan will definitely be very happy. There are quite a number of beautiful girls who like his books and music. It can be said that love will find a way. Why does something feel not quite right? This topic made a group of people discuss it for a while. In the end, the chairman made the decision. Since no one has a better idea, let's do it according to the current plan. I'll name it Tinder Operation. Remember to keep it a secret and don't let Mr. Hechuan know about it. The group of high-ranking officials nodded at the same time like children. There was a hint of caution in their eyes. Chapter 12 Chapter 12, Calamity of a Beauty. What? A pool party? Are you kidding me? Hechuan looked at the group of high-ranking officials with malicious smiles on their faces and was completely confused. What time was it now, and they still wanted to have fun? They actually wanted to have a pool party. Right now was clearly winter. Sir, I have never seen a second person who is more diligent than you. You work from morning till night. If this continues, your body will be exhausted. Why don't you relax? The director of the United Nations waved to the outside. Soon, a special bulletproof car drove into the research institute and stopped in front of them. Hechuan did not move. He frowned and said, "If you are trying to curry favor for no reason, you are either a traitor or a thief. If you have anything to say, just say it. I don't like to beat around the bush." This. The director was a little embarrassed, but his expression did not change. He insisted, "You will know what is going on when you get there. There is a surprise that we have prepared for you. It can't be a fright, right?" Hechuan was very suspicious of this. Of course not. A middle-aged high-ranking official next to him smiled ambiguously and said, "You'll definitely like it." Hechuan didn't quite believe it, so he directly used the deduction system. "You get into this car, have a safe journey, and have a wonderful day." It seemed that everything was really fine. Only then did he relax, and sat in the car whose door the chairman personally opened. "Aren't you guys going?" Hechuan asked. The pool party would definitely be dominated by pretty girls. If he was the only man present, it would be too awkward. The director saw Hechuan's concern and was afraid that he would go back on his words, so he said, "We'll be there soon." Hechuan nodded. Before he left, he did not forget to tell the people in the research institute that even if he was not there, the research could not be stopped. Hundreds of researchers promised to let Hechuan relax to his heart's content. As they watched the car slowly drive away, the group of people led by the director could not help but laugh. "I didn't expect there to be so many people responding to the Tinder operation. This time, Mr. Hechuan will have fortunes in love affairs with women." "Oh right, have you investigated the background of these people?" "I've already done that. The girls who were able to enter the party this time were all clean. Even those who had ex-boyfriends were excluded." "Not bad, you've thought of everything." After Hechuan arrived at the destination, he found out that the party was held in a manor villa in the mountains. It was very high-end. As soon as he got off the car, two demure and beautiful girls walked up with sparkling eyes. "Ah, so handsome. Brother Hechuan, you look even more elegant than on TV." They looked like twin sisters. "Thank you." Hechuan did not know how to answer them, so he could only say, "You guys are also very beautiful." The twin sisters smiled and held each of his arms to welcome him in. The soft touch kept coming from their arms as they walked, making Hechuan's mouth dry. Cough. He tried to pull his hand back and let out a voice to remind the two girls that it was not appropriate to be so intimate with each other for the first time. In the end, they hugged each other even tighter. This made Hechuan very embarrassed. At this moment, The phone rang. It was the director who called. When he picked it up, it was a voice message. "I'm sorry, Mr. He Chuan. We have a last-minute meeting, so we can't go. Have a good time." There was no chance of rejection or inquiry. The phone was busy. When he called again, it was turned off. Very good. He Chuan gritted his teeth. His brain was already working fast, so how could he not know what the United Nations was trying to do? It was nothing more than using the pool party as a cover to let him keep his seed. Damn it! He did not expect to experience such a disaster in the reincarnation world. Since ancient times, a hero could not overcome beauty. Although he was not a hero, he was a real virgin in both the reincarnation world and this world. To put it bluntly, he had never encountered such a situation. For a moment, there was no information flowing through his brain. Facing such a gentle attack, he didn't know how to respond. What should he do? What should he do? Bang! He Chuan suddenly widened his eyes, his body went limp, and he collapsed onto the ground. His brain actually overworked at such a time, causing his illness to relapse. F***ck. The two girls beside him seemed to have been prepared. They held him tightly in their arms at the same time, preventing He Chuan from falling. But this way, the degree of contact between them became even more erotic. Although He Chuan's limbs were paralyzed, it was not that he had lost his sensory feedback, it was just that he had lost his mobility. He only felt that he was in an incomparably magical and soft world. Words could not describe it. When he stepped into the backyard, the scene in front of him made him even more surprised. Although it was winter, the manor was equipped with a thermostat system. Moreover, the pool was a natural hot spring. Even in the open air, you would not feel cold if you took off your clothes. At this moment, there were more than a dozen beautiful girls with outstanding looks and slim figures, wearing all kinds of swimsuits, elegantly doing their own things. When the twins brought He Chuan in, they all looked over in unison. Some sized him up, some admired him, some adored him, and some were fanatical. When He Chuan looked back at them, he saw a lot of different emotions. Hey! There seemed to be a few familiar faces. He seemed to have seen them on TV. This was a famous European and American model. And this? A Japanese and Korean star? This young lady had a good temperament. She had the air of a big sister. What was the name of the little girl next to her? She seemed to be a genius girl from somewhere. She was wearing a black one-piece swimsuit, which was a little conservative. However, as she walked, the hem of her dress kept fluttering, making her look extremely youthful and lively. My name is Gu Jiao. I'm a student in the 26th year of the genius class. Senior brother He Chuan, nice to meet you. Gu Jiao's smile was very sweet and beautiful, like a pure white and flawless rose. When He Chuan heard that she was from the genius class, he had a good impression of her, so he also smiled. The two of them gradually found a topic to talk about. The other girls also came over to introduce themselves one after another. After they got to know each other, everyone tacitly left some space for Gu Jiao and He Chuan. When they were in the mood to chat, Gu Jiao suddenly took the wine glass at the side and shook it gently. Do you want to drink some? Okay. Night gradually fell. He Chuan was unable to move and was escorted to the room by a group of peerless beauties. They kissed him goodbye one by one and left one after another. In the end, only Gu Jiao remained. There was silence everywhere. She was in the room under the white moonlight, and a faint blush appeared on her face. After an unknown amount of time, she suddenly stammered, "Senior, can you close your eyes?" He Chuan sensed what was about to happen and could not help but swallow his saliva. After repeatedly struggling with his desires and rationality, he reminded the girl in front of him. You are a very good girl. You have a great time. There is no need for you to be with me that is about to die. He stopped mid-sentence. Gu Jiao covered his mouth with her small hand. She said in a serious and affectionate tone, "Senior, I am willing. I like you. Actually, I'm already very satisfied to be able to see you, and now to have such an opportunity. I'm very happy. Every sister who came here thinks so, you must not feel sorry for us." He Chuan stopped talking. The girl had already said so, what else could he do? Gu Jiao took off her clothes bit by bit, and her pure white skin was completely exposed in He Chuan's line of sight. Under his curious and nervous eyes, she sat down and found a spot to sit down slowly. It hurt. But this was her favorite senior, she had to persevere. The night wind blew the dark clouds, blocking the bright light. In the darkness, only the sound of deep breathing was left. 13 Chapter 13 Chapter 13, The End of Science, The End of Great Man. For the next 3 months, He Chuan stayed in this villa without going out. It wasn't that he was lustful, but that the United Nations had planned this and didn't want him to leave. No matter what reason or excuse he used to ask to leave, they could always find a way to stop him. You want the follow-up on the progress of the research institute, right? Okay. The United Nations sent someone to install the most advanced projection equipment the next day. If you have anything to say, just say it online. Anyway, Mr. He Chuan, your health is not convenient, so it's quite good for you to cultivate here. He Chuan was speechless. It was actually inconvenient for him. Each day the time he was being paralyzed became longer and longer, it had seriously affected his work efficiency. Although he relied on his brain power and system deduction, scientific research could not be done without experiments. He had to advance both theory and practice simultaneously. Now that he had the help of 100 scientific researchers, it freed his hands. He just needed to keep an eye on the overall direction of his research. There were people looking after his clothes, food, shelter, and transportation. Everything he used was the highest standard. It could be said that he had enjoyed a luxurious life in this last period of his life. Moreover, there were more than a dozen girls who adored him. Every day, they would come up with different ways to make him happy. The treatment of the ancient emperors was only so-so, right? Congratulations on obtaining a special achievement, the winner of life, your evaluation points have been slightly increased. There was still 1 more year before he turned 20. He Chuan's reincarnation seal sent him a notification. At this moment, his limbs were completely unable to move, and he had completely lost the ability to move. Of the 3 plans that the Research Institute had originally been working on, 2 had been sentenced to death by the deduction system after trial and error. And the last plan had come to an end today. There was no feasible way. More than a dozen women who belonged to him surrounded the bed. After hearing the news, pain and despair mixed together and filled their hearts. At this moment, they were very clear. This result was no different from the scythe of death to He Chuan. Their husbands. 1 more year. The savior of mankind would completely disappear from this world. Gu Jiao leaned against the bed and gently wiped He Chuan's unresponsive palm with a forced smile on her face. She wanted He Chuan to remember her most beautiful appearance. However, as she wiped, she could not hold back her tears. They fell from her eyes and landed on the pure white bed sheet, forming an irregular flower. Silly girl, you're crying even after putting on makeup. You're like a colorful cat now. He Chuan looked at her exquisite face. He did not expect the atmosphere to be so sad, so he teased her. How could a smart girl like Gu Jiao not understand He Chuan's intentions? However, the more He Chuan acted nonchalant, the more they felt their hearts ache. Gu Jiao's nose twitched. She could not help but bury her head in He Chuan's arms and hugged him tightly. Is there no other way? He Chuan sighed softly. Just as he was about to reach out and hug Gu Jiao's back, he realized that he could no longer move. He could not help but fall silent for a moment. After a long while, he spoke slowly. In this era, or perhaps in the next era, I have already reached the end of my path in science. Genes were unable to be broken through. Hearing this result, Gu Jiao hugged him even tighter. Senior, I don't want you to leave me. The girls standing next to her, although they were slightly older and more knowledgeable than Gu Jiao, couldn't help but cry when they heard this. At this moment, someone knocked on the door. The nearby girls went to open the door to check. It was the people from the United Nations. They had also received the news and rushed over. The head of the board of directors at the front was no longer as calm as before. He approached them and asked with concern. Mr. He Chuan, did your plan really fail completely? Yes, it did fail. There's nothing I can do. He Chuan nodded slightly and said, I have one last request. I want you to help me. Mr. He Chuan, please go ahead. The chairman said seriously, whatever it is, I will do my best. I want to read all the books in the world. Perhaps, the predecessors have thought about some things that we modern people have overlooked. Okay, I will go and apply for it, your body. It's okay. It's just that I can't move. My brain can still function. I understand. The chairman immediately acted. After he left, he made dozens of calls. The content of the calls only conveyed one message. Mr. He Chuan wanted to read all the documents. There was no discussion at all, and there was not much communication. Countries responded one after another, and they used the media to solicit books and documents from the public. For a time, people all over the world were busy. After all, no matter who it was, there were more or less a few books in their homes. Some people who liked to collect books had even larger reserves. But they still did not hesitate at all. They immediately sorted them all out. Even some of the out-of-print books that were passed down in the family were copied, packed up, and sent to He Chuan's manor villa. That afternoon, the roar of a helicopter's propeller could be heard outside the villa. The box full of books fell and soon filled up half the yard. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. Countless books were on their way. The United Nations immediately recruited volunteers from the community to help organize them. Within 10 minutes of the call, the number of respondents had exceeded 1 million. They had two things to do. The first was to classify and compile a general catalogue. The second was to select the books He Chuan wanted to read, scan the contents and upload them online for easy reading. Under the joint action of tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of books were quickly divided and sorted out. Paper books filled the city. This was the testimony of the entire history of human civilization. It was the wealth of all mankind. At this time, it was delivered to He Chuan bit by bit. He began to deduce without any consideration of the consequences. Since he was already paralyzed, what else could he do? With this thought in mind, the things he deduced were also very complicated. Gu Jiao and the others accompanied him, taking notes for these deduction data days and nights. 1 day. 1 month. 1 year. A total of 365 days. They stayed together, spending the last days of He Chuan's lives with him. On a sunny morning, He Chuan finally felt that his time was coming. His hands and feet regained consciousness at this time. He knew that this was the last ray of light. It was the last struggle of the cells of his body. He had not slept or rested for 4 consecutive days, so he did not feel tired at all. He did not disturb the girls who were sleeping in a corner of the room. He got off the bed alone and went to the French window. He looked at the people who were still guarding him in the courtyard and smiled. The guards noticed this abnormality at the first moment and reported it immediately. In less than 3 minutes, the directors and secretaries of the various countries who were stationed nearby rushed over. They were all extremely surprised when they saw He Chuan, who seemed to have regained his vitality. Is Mr. He Chuan all right? This was a question that lingered in everyone's mind. Countless media outlets turned on their cameras at the same time, preparing to record this historic moment. But then, He Chuan took out his phone and placed it aside as if he had recorded something. Then, he faced the rising sun and closed his eyes. He fell to the ground with a loud bang. This was the end of a scientific giant, a genius that was rarely seen in 10,000 years. 14 Chapter 14 Chapter 14, A New Era, the Ancestor of Genes. Science always gave people a pleasant surprise. I originally thought I wouldn't be able to solve the genetic puzzle at the end of my life, but I didn't expect it to play a little joke on me. I found the answer, but I won't live past today. Fortunately, I didn't waste my time in this life. Although I have experienced pain, I also have had a wonderful life. I enjoyed numerous things in life and witnessed the ups and downs of the world. I have no regrets. It is a pity that I cannot give the girls who love me a complete future. I am sorry, please allow me to be selfish. But the end of life is not death, don't be sad for me. Don't ask why. There are more things that you need to discover on your own. Now, let's talk about that answer. It's more complicated to explain. I've recorded the contents in that deduction notebook. Those who are interested can take a look. Although it's long and lousy, I believe it can bring you some help. At the end of the notebook, I've marked the method of making a potion that can break through the genetic restriction. You can use it. However, I need to remind you that this potion is unable to unleash its full power. This world is too weak, it's unable to withstand this power. Only when it's brought to a higher level of the world will its effects be displayed. It might sound a little illusory, but to put it in a more realistic way, it's to experience it on another planet. For more specific things, you can explore on your own. The road of life is long. If you can really cross the galaxy and travel through the dimensions, perhaps one day we'll meet again. Ladies and gentlemen, take care. The recording stopped abruptly. At this moment, the room was already filled with people. He Chuan's corpse, which had already turned cold, was now sealed in an ice coffin. There was still a faint smile on his face. Gu Jiao prostrated herself on top of the crystal coffin. Her slender and small hands tried to caress his face through the barrier, sobbing uncontrollably. "Senior! You haven't heard me call you husband." Billions of people observed a moment of silence. This scene had been broadcast live through the media and spread all over the world. From then on, the world had one more day of remembrance that all mankind had to remember. It belonged exclusively to He Chuan, to commemorate the day he passed away. Not long after, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization began to compile a biography of He Chuan. It recorded his life of great achievements. He was the one and only young genius in the history of mankind. Facing the problem of hunger caused by natural disasters, he started from scratch and cultivated hybrid rice in just 3 months. Within a year, the famine was completely solved. Even the plague that swept across the world and left countless top researchers helpless was solved in less than a month in his hands. Not only that, but he also brought thousands of famous songs and hundreds of masterpieces to the world. The profits he had obtained had also been donated to the poor for free. The later research had even brought about the advancement of science in the world for hundreds of years. Even at the end of his life, he had unlocked the genetic restrictions of the entire human civilization. Even though he was full of glory, he had given himself to everyone. Numerous selfless feats were listed in detail, causing countless people to be shocked and moved. Many ordinary people originally only had a partial understanding of He Chuan through the special medicine for the new virus. Now, they suddenly discovered something. This 20-year-old boy had actually done such a great performance in so many places without anyone noticing. Admirable. Honorable. Unfortunately, the million-word deduction notebook left behind by He Chuan was something that no one could understand. The descendants had to follow the method recorded in the book and put the gene reagent into production and use it in large quantities. It was just as he had described in his last words. Most of the people ate it, but there was no obvious effect. Instead, some of the social elites sent feedback, feeling that their physique and intelligence had improved significantly. The research data showed that these people's cells had stronger activity, and their life cycles were longer. That was to say, they had some of the same abilities as He Chuan, but they didn't die prematurely because of excessive cell depletion. Decades passed in the blink of an eye. This was confirmed by the changing times. The first people who took the gene agent suddenly realized that they weren't getting very old. They were now in their 70s and 80s. They actually still possessed the energy and skin condition in their 30s. This made everyone excited. Gene reagents could extend one's lifespan. The higher UPS of various countries all realized this. This was the greatest benefit of breaking through to the genetic level. As long as one had enough time to grow, even the weakest person could become an elite of society. This was a qualitative change. It was the embodiment of the overall progress of human civilization. It was also at this time that after so many years of research, some people finally managed to gain some understanding of that deduction notebook. They were shocked to discover that He Chuan had actually left a path for human civilization to enter the higher dimension. Even though they were unable to decipher the more specific content, this information was already enough to make them excited. Thus, technological civilization began to transform toward the genetic evolution civilization. After a few hundred years, genetic warriors became the mainstream of this world. Now, there was no longer any boundary between countries. There was only a coalition government dealing with matters of all sizes. A new era had begun. Everything had become different. Only in the most prosperous square of each jurisdiction, a tall, humanoid statue remains. Every year, countless people would come to pay their respects. His deeds were written in textbooks. He would be remembered by future generations. He was the ancestor of the genes, He Chuan. Even though his life had already dissipated, in this space-time, this will would remain eternal. 15 Chapter 15 Chapter 15, the first round of reincarnation has ended, the rewards will be calculated. Reincarnation has ended. Calculating the evaluation index. On the reincarnation platform, tens of thousands of rays of white light gathered and formed He Chuan's body. He slowly opened his eyes. Looking at the familiar surroundings, he let out a long sigh. He was finally back. Even though this reincarnation did not reverse the final outcome of death at the age of 20. However, he believed that with his contributions and achievements over the years, it would not be a problem for him to be rated above B. The quota for permanent reincarnators had already been obtained. It all depended on what level he could reach in the end. Soon, a notification came from the temporary reincarnation seal. Reincarnation evaluation completed. Personal achievements: writer, musician, philanthropist, agricultural scientist, biologist. Rating has been greatly increased. FB+. Reward 1000 reincarnation points and a self-created item, deduction notes. Social contribution, poverty alleviation, solving famine, eliminating world-class harmful viruses. Overall rating increased. B+, A+. Reward 10,000 reincarnation points, gene reagent, perfect quality, 1 portion. Character template reversal degree, 0%. Survived for 20 years, failed to change the trajectory of fate, score remains unchanged. Hidden achievement achieved, the replacement of the era. Unraveling the mystery of He Clan's syndrome, leading the genetic warriors to completely change the direction of the world, becoming famous throughout the ages, final rating increased by 1 level. This reincarnation's evaluation, S. When the evaluation exceeds B, the temporary reincarnation seal will automatically transform into a permanent reincarnation seal. Additional S-rank reincarnation evaluation reward obtained. 1. The deduction system is retained. 2. Obtain a one-time talent, Heavenly Deo simulation. During the next reincarnation, you will be able to deduce your own future. 3. Obtain valiant heart, you will be fearless, and will not doubt yourself at any time, creating inner demons. S rank. Am I seeing things? He Chuan rubbed his eyes in disbelief and looked at it twice. There was no minus sign. It was a genuine S. The reward was beyond imagination. First was a total of 11,000 reincarnation points. This was a huge amount of wealth. It could be exchanged for about 100,000 gold coins. Without spending recklessly, a family of 3 could spend more than 20,000 years. However, he would not foolishly go in exchange for it. After all, things that could be bought with gold coins could also be bought with the reincarnation point. However, things that could be bought with the reincarnation point might not necessarily be able to be bought with gold coins. The reincarnation point represented not only money but also status and position. This was an exclusive item for reincarnators. With so many reincarnation points, even if it was used to exchange for reset the reincarnated world, such a heaven-defying temporary talent was more than enough. Next, there was the perfect version of the gene reagent and the deduction notebook. These were all things created by He Chuan himself. The medicine was fine, but it was useful after drinking it. However, the deduction notebook was a bit of a headache. He did not suffer from He Clan's syndrome. His brain cells were not active enough, so he had already forgotten most of the contents. Reading it repeatedly now could only bring up a portion of his memories. As for using this to improve the gene reagent, or even to create a second or third generation gene reagent, that was unlikely. Even now, the deduction system had become one of the rewards. The strength of the deduction system was its computational ability. But this function was built on the basis of the host. In layman's terms, it was to see if your brain was spinning fast. The faster it was spinning, the more efficient the deduction would be. Based on He Chuan's current condition, if he was asked to start from scratch to study gene reagents again, it would definitely take hundreds or even thousands of years to succeed. This was something that couldn't be helped. However, it was better than nothing. The deduction system's value was still very high. It was far higher than all the other rewards added up. One could say that if this reincarnated character did not have a deduction system attached to it, then it was impossible for him to obtain an S-grade evaluation. Looks like I have to become stronger. He Chuan secretly set his goal in his heart. The deduction system was a growth-type thing. The more powerful the user was, the more its effects would be reflected. I hope I can reincarnate into a world with a power system next time. Martial arts is the best, it can lay a foundation. Forget about the cultivation world. It's not easy to develop. The power level of genetic warriors is still too weak for this kind of world. In any case, don't go to the parallel city. All you can gain is theoretical knowledge. It's useless. He Chuan shook his head, turned around, and walked down the platform. Right now, he still had other things to do. After the assessment ended, he had to take the reincarnation seal to the school to register. Only then could he be considered to have an official identity. For those who have participated in the reincarnation assessment for the first time, go back to your original place and wait. The school has a unified arrangement. The guard at the door suddenly called out to him. He Chuan nodded and turned to walk to a corner of the square. All the students in the class were there. The expressions on everyone's faces were not very good. It could even be described as being in excruciating pain. If nothing unexpected happened, it was definitely because the score of the reincarnation assessment was not enough that they had failed the assessment. The only chance to become a reincarnator in life was gone just like that. At the front was the class teacher. He had a distressed look on his face and kept nagging. Why hasn't anyone passed the assessment this year? It's been 4 consecutive years. How am I going to explain this to the higher UPS? I'm afraid that my title as an excellent teacher will be revoked next year. How can I live with my salary halved? He Chuan walked over casually and quietly stood at the back of the line. The class teacher still noticed him. Seeing He Chuan was like seeing a life-saving straw. He walked up with a smile. "Student He Chuan, how was your reincarnation? Did it go well?" 16 Chapter 16 Chapter 16, the S-rank evaluation was made public. The coalition government's $1 million reward. "Not bad, at least I passed the assessment." He Chuan did not elaborate. After all, the S-rank evaluation was too scary. If he remembered correctly, none of the students who participated in the assessment in the past had achieved this kind of evaluation. The highest rating was only an A+. He had broken the record of many years of examinations. If he were to tell others, perhaps no one would believe him. After all, he was a person from an ordinary background. Where did he get such great ability? The homeroom teacher did not ask in detail and laughed out loud. "You really did not disappoint, teacher." "Good. Very good." He patted He Chuan on the shoulder, his eyes filled with admiration. He thought to himself, that his original plan was indeed very successful, the 50 reincarnation points were not wasted. Although the price was a little high. But spending some money could exchange for career prospects, as well as a new reincarnator's good impression. After careful calculation, it was not a loss. The students next to him cast envious gazes one after another. There was an indescribable longing. No one had expected it. Once upon a time, the poor had suddenly become an unreachable reincarnator lord. From today onwards, they would walk on two completely different paths. The gap between their statuses would grow larger and larger. To put it bluntly, no matter how bad He Chuan's life was in the future, even if he became a weakling that was ridiculed by all the reincarnators, He Chuan was still in existence that they needed to look up to. The little things that fell out from under their fingernails could allow ordinary people like them to live in luxury for a long time. Why not take advantage of the fact that the friendship between them had yet to fade and hug He Chuan's thigh? There were many people who had such thoughts. Who knows, they might be able to find a decent and stable job through this. For a time, many students who used to treat him with an ordinary attitude came to flatter him. He Chuan did not feel embarrassed. He dealt with all of them calmly. However, he kept a very low-key attitude and communicated with other students. He did not have the habit of showing off in front of ordinary people. After all, he had come up from the bottom. This kind of behavior was meaningless. Other than obtaining a pitiful, empty sense of satisfaction, it was of no use. Moreover, he had lived in the reincarnated world for 20 years. He had been in and out of the upper class and had interacted with high-ranking officials and nobles. What kind of world had he not seen? So many glories had filled up this vanity long ago. It was also because of this that when the others talked to him, they felt as if they were bathed in a spring breeze. This made everyone puzzled. He Chuan was clearly a child who had walked out of the slums. Moreover, he was the lowest of the low. How could he be so good with words? Facing so many people's adoration, he was actually able to be so calm and collected. It was as if he was in this kind of environment all year round. There was even a kind of indescribable superior temperament. Most people were very puzzled about this. After thinking about it, it could only be attributed to the fact that He Chuan was born with the temperament of a leader. Other than this reason, there was no other explanation. At this moment, a man took a step forward from the platform of the reincarnation square. Immediately, a shadow that was nearly 100 meters tall appeared behind him. This unusual situation attracted everyone's attention. He looked dignified and swept his gaze across the crowd like a god as he spoke slowly. "Students, I am the usher of this year's reincarnation grand examination. Please line up in your class and stay in your respective areas. Next, the students who pass the examination will be rewarded according to their ranking by the coalition government." The voice was incomparably loud and clear, and everyone couldn't help but raise their heads to look up. For a moment, the students were all shocked. F*CK, 10,000 avatar. Isn't this a divine ability that can only be obtained in the fantasy world? Which big shot is this? I don't know. This kind of reward can only be obtained by getting at least an A grade. I'm afraid that not many people in the entire administrative region possess it. The A rank of the fantasy world, so terrifying. A big shot of this level came here just to give out a reward? That's impossible, right? It definitely isn't that simple. Could it be that our school has a reincarnator with an A and rating this time? Don't joke around. Do you know how difficult to get an A and rating is? Even in the lowest level of the urban world, it's impossible for you to reach an A rating even if you are elected as the country's leader. An A and rating is even more unrealistic. Who cares? I didn't pass the assessment anyway. This thing definitely has nothing to do with me. How many people do you think passed the assessment this time? Can He Chuan enter the top 10? I don't know. He didn't say what his final rating is. I don't think so. It's true that He Chuan passed the assessment, but with his conditions, he definitely can't afford to buy temporary talent. Without the help of such external forces, it's already very rare for him to get a B rating for the first time. It's unlikely for him to get a higher rating. You don't know about that, right? My dad is a reincarnator. He told me that the fewer external forces a reincarnator used, the better. It's best if you don't bring in a temporary talent. That way, you'll get more points. In other words, the poorer a person is, the more likely they are to succeed in reincarnating. Nonsense, right? That's right. What's the use of a temporary talent then? That's different. First-time reincarnators like us don't have any experience at all. We definitely need a temporary talent to help with reincarnation. Secondly, there are those who meet with the world's high difficulty. Without the help of a temporary talent, they won't be able to hold on for long. The opportunity to be a reincarnator is so rare, who would be willing to waste it? I heard that reincarnators have a special forum. The information inside is even more than what is taught in the school. It's all a summary of the experiences of previous generations. However, it can't be leaked out. Only reincarnators have the right to see it. I don't know who will get first place. The rewards given by the coalition government will definitely be very generous. Soon, the man on the platform received the list and began to read it out. He used the Dharma behind him to transmit his voice to every corner of the square. 47th place, Chris, grade B, reincarnated into the world of martial arts, with the top grade temporary talent. Rewarded with 3,000 reincarnation points and 1 standard house. 46th place, Wanyan Vaya, grade B, reincarnated into a parallel urban world, with a mid-grade temporary talent. Rewarded with 5,000 reincarnation points and 1 standard house. 45th place, Teto. As the announcement was made, beams of light shot out from the light ball on the reincarnated platform, landing on the person whose name was called. Not long after, a special person delivered the reward. Everyone looked at this scene with great envy. Those who were in the bottom few were rewarded with thousands of reincarnation points, so wouldn't the top few be rewarded with tens of thousands? As expected, the following rewards were even more generous. 3rd place, Xiao He, B and grade, reincarnated in a parallel city world, carries low-grade talent. Rewarded with 30,000 reincarnation points, and a low-grade fire attribute special ability fruit. 2nd place, Deng Ken, B grade, reincarnated in a world of martial arts, carries low-grade talent. Rewarded with 50,000 reincarnation points, and 1 basic body tempering cultivation technique book in the immortal cultivation world. Speaking up to this point, he paused for a moment and slowed down his pace. 1st place. He Chuan, does not carry reincarnated talent. S grade. Rewarded with a manor and villa set. Number of spiritual fields. Reincarnated guards, Team 1. Reincarnation points, 1 million. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone was shocked. Especially those classmates who had interacted with He Chuan day and night were all stunned. None of them expected that the person from the worst family in the class actually won first place. S rank? And he achieved it without talent? Everyone fell into deep doubt. This world wasn't fake, right? Playing such a big joke on them? 17 Chapter 17 Chapter 17 experienced a lot of attention. He Chuan looked helplessly at the golden beam of light that landed on his body. He had originally wanted to keep a low profile, but now, he was exposed in public. The coalition government was indeed rich and powerful. The rewards one after another made He Chuan, who had seen the world, feel a little dizzy. The first was the 1 million reincarnation points. This was even more powerful than the purchasing power of 10 million gold coins. He could buy whatever he wanted to buy and realize the true freedom of consumption. In addition, there was a residence with a spirit field. The so-called spirit field was a special land that could grow spirit foods and spirit fruits. These were all things that the reincarnators on the market could not wish for. Long-term consumption of spirit foods could effectively improve the body's basic qualities and increase strength. Spirit fruit could stimulate intelligence and greatly enhance spiritual power. These were all things He Chuan needed. Especially the latter. If he wanted to quickly deduce, he would have to have a stronger spiritual power. In addition, the coalition government had even assigned a team of reincarnators to guard him. This was a bit exaggerated. He was not a leader, why would he need to be protected? He did not know what they were thinking. After a short period of surprise, He Chuan returned to his usual indifferent appearance. The coalition government would definitely not give so many benefits for free. If he was blinded by benefits, he would not be far from being controlled by others. Soon, the man personally delivered the reward. He looked at He Chuan's indifferent expression and nodded in satisfaction. Let's go out for a walk. He Chuan did not refuse. It was obvious that the other party had something to discuss with him in private. Thus, the two of them sat in the luxurious custom-made sedan waiting outside the school, leaving behind a group of stunned students. On the way, through their conversation, He Chuan also understood the other party's intentions. This was the representative sent by the coalition government. He was specially sent to receive He Chuan. His name was K Yuan. His status was very high. Among the reincarnators, he was considered one of the strongest. Sending him here also showed how much the coalition government valued He Chuan. He Chuan was still a little confused. I only got an S rank in the parallel city world. How did the coalition government notice me? Usually, doesn't the news often show who got an S rank? That's just publicity. Do you think it's that easy? There are hundreds of billions of people in the world, tens of millions of reincarnators, and the number of reincarnators every day is no less than 6 figures. K Yuan smiled slightly, but in fact, most people's final rating is between E and B. There are very few people who can get above A, only a few hundred people. These two sentences made He Chuan's impression of this world change once again. It turned out that it was more difficult than he had imagined to get a high reincarnation evaluation score. However, after a moment of silence, he still said, "That's not bad too, an S rank is not that hard to come by." No, your score. K Yuan explained, those people are old foxes who have reincarnated more than 10 times. Their personal experience and strength are not something that someone who had just reincarnated like you can compare with. They can easily get an A and or an S in parallel cities or martial arts worlds, but you are different. What's the difference? You are the only person whose personal strength matches the difficulty of the reincarnated world, and you even got an S-grade evaluation. Do you understand now? K Yuan's expression suddenly became a little sorrowful. When I first reincarnated to an ordinary city, I only got an A grade with the temporary talent living comfortably. Tell me how valuable you are, those people even called you the light of hope for reincarnated people. He Chuan was silent. The light of hope? That doesn't sound right. Ke Yuan saw the expression on He Chuan's face and couldn't help patting his shoulder. Don't think too much, it's good for you now, the coalition government will pour a lot of resources on you, whatever you need, we'll try to meet it. He Chuan shook his head and said, I just want to be stronger and control my own destiny. It's a very realistic ideal. The smile on Ke Yuan's face became even brighter. He turned to look out of the window and said, We've arrived at the reincarnation bank. Let's go. I'll take you to witness how much wealth 1,000,000 reincarnation points are. Soon, He Chuan stepped into the reincarnation bank under Ke Yuan's lead. It seemed that the higher UPS had already informed him. The bank manager personally handled the business for He Chuan. In the shortest amount of time, everything was taken care of for him. In addition to the millions of reincarnation points, he also received the house deeds for the manor villa. When these things were really in his hands, it would be a lie to say that he was unhappy. In the blink of an eye, not only did he have so much wealth, but he also got to know Ke Yuan, a high-level figure in the coalition government. It could be said that his status had changed greatly with the success of his first reincarnation. At this time, two figures first appeared in He Chuan's mind. They were the parents of this world. They had worked hard to bring themselves up. They had worked hard for half of their lives. It was time for him, this son, to let them enjoy a good life. After that, He Chuan was ready to go to the slums and bring his parents to live in the manor villa. Ke Yuan followed him and did his best. The environment in the slums was very bad. It was too dirty and messy to be described. Cars could not pass through at all. To avoid accidents, Ke Yuan sent the reincarnated guards to maintain law and order and cleared the road for He Chuan to go home. At the end of the road stood a dilapidated wooden house. It was even divided into several parts and several families lived in it. He Chuan's house was the smallest one. However, there was no one in it at the moment. According to the neighbors, father and mother, he had gone out to look for temporary work early in the morning and would not come back until the evening. This could not help but make He Chuan feel sad in his heart. Ke Yuan immediately looked at the reincarnator squad leader next to him and gave him a look. The other party immediately understood and pulled more than a dozen reincarnators to spread out and search for information at the nearby employment agency. Not long after, a couple with rough and dark skin, who looked to be in their 60s, was brought over. He Chuan rushed up without hesitation and hugged them tightly. He Chuan's mother's eyes were moist, and He Chuan's father was also in tears. They learned from the reincarnator's guards that their child had now become the most dazzling star of this year's assessment. The only reincarnator in history who got the S rating in his first reincarnations. The future is bright. 18 Chapter 18 Chapter 18, Seeing the Bully Girl Again. The family chatted for a while. When relatives and friends heard the news, they all ran over to give their blessings. They all looked at He Chuan with respect and envy in their eyes. A reincarnator. This was an existence that many ordinary people had to look up to in their entire lives. They did not expect that a child who had successfully broken the shackles of the social class would appear in their family. It was truly the blessing of the ancestors. Many passers-by secretly regarded this child from the He family as a benchmark. Everyone was from the slums. Since your He family could nurture the descendants of reincarnators, why can't we? For a time, everyone's hearts were filled with motivation. He Chuan's appearance undoubtedly brought a shock to the beliefs of these people who lived at the lowest level. In this world, nothing is impossible. It just doesn't happen to you. If you work hard enough, you can still change the future. After that, He Chuan moved to a new house with his parents. On the side of the manor villa, the reincarnated guards assigned to He Chuan were already doing their protection assignment. According to Ke Yuan, this group of people would be responsible for protecting He Chuan's family and property, so that he would have no worries when he reincarnated. Everyone was powerful, and they were all professional bodyguards. Usually, they relied on this kind of protection work to earn reincarnation points. With the government's funding, they had spent a lot of money to invite them over. He Chuan expressed his gratitude for this. His parents were honest people who had never seen the world, let alone experienced wealth and honor. When they came to the manor and saw the luxurious decoration inside, they were all very restrained. When they were choosing the room, they chose the most simple room among the many luxurious ones. If he remembered correctly, this seemed to be a place for the servants to live. In the end, this caused the servants to become restrained. He Chuan repeatedly comforted them, but the effect was still not great. He had no choice but to let the two elders and the servants slowly get used to it. After a series of matters were settled, the sun had already set and it was time to rest. At this moment, Ke Yuan stood up and took his leave. I've already arranged the manpower for the manor. Leave all kinds of matters to the butler. You guys can stay here in peace. If there's anything, call this number. As he spoke, Ke Yuan handed over a business card. He told He Chuan to call the higher UPS directly when he ran into a problem that he couldn't solve. There would be people assigned to handle it. Thank you for your trouble, Mr. K. He Chuan nodded. I want to start the next reincarnation as soon as possible. Is there any way to obtain the number of times? This is a little troublesome. Usually, if the reincarnators want to reincarnate again, they have to undergo a series of evaluations to avoid wasting resources. Ke Yuan thought for a moment, leave it to me. Since the coalition government has already planned to train you, they will definitely not be stingy in this aspect. After all, the faster you grow, the better it will be for them. What benefits will they have? He Chuan was a little curious. You'll understand the benefits of being strong in the future. Don't think too much about it now. Ke Yuan smiled slightly and didn't elaborate. He Chuan expressed his understanding. He took the business card and watched the other leave. Why do I always feel a sense of crisis? He Chuan tried to use the system's deductive ability to obtain some information. In the end, in the process of deducing the event, adding the parameter not getting stronger, future, original world. The number of prediction development of the storylines is unknown, and unable to obtain the optimal solution. Forcefully deducing the prediction will take 1 trillion years. Alright, I don't have enough brain power, forget it. He Chuan yawned. After working for so long, he was physically and mentally exhausted. He went straight upstairs to prepare the water, took off his clothes, and immersed his entire body in the water. The luxurious bathtub came with its own massage function. He Chuan enjoyed the subtle touch coming all over his body. At the same time, he opened the Reincarnators Forum and began to understand the knowledge that only reincarnators could gain. The forum was more lively than he had imagined. Every time he refreshed it, there would be many new posts. There were fights, insults, discussions, and sharing. Everything was there. He Chuan ignored these contents. After filtering out most of the popular posts, he finally found something he was interested in. The first was 100 knowledge points that a new reincarnator must know. This was an academic post. It listed a lot of problems that a new reincarnator might encounter, as well as suggestions. He was immersed in it, but halfway through, someone suddenly knocked on the door. Come in, the door isn't locked. He Chuan originally thought that it would be his parents who would come in and ask him if they had any equipment. However, a fragrant wind blew and a crisp voice that sounded like an aureole rang in his ears. Sir Reincarnator, I am the secretary sent by Mr. K and am in charge of serving you. Secretary? Serving? He Chuan turned around in confusion. The voice sounded familiar, but he could not tell who it was. The lights in the bathroom were not turned on. For the sake of extreme relaxation, he chose a dark environment. Right now, only the floor-to-ceiling windows that were close to the bathtub could be seen. The neon lights that were used for decoration flickered. Amidst the flickering lights, one could only see a young girl with a graceful figure and sexy clothes. She was carrying a crystal bowl filled with spirit foods and spirit fruits as she approached. She placed the thing in her hand on the edge of the bathtub and asked softly. "Sir, do you want to eat something?" "No, I'm not hungry." "Then, shall I massage your shoulders? This bathtub has a massage function." He Chuan's voice was flat. "Go out, I don't need anyone to serve me. Go back and tell Mr. K to change your jobs." Bang! In the darkness, the young girl's body trembled as she knelt on the ground, her voice trembling. "Sir Reincarnator, what did Wenyu do wrong? You can hit and scold her however you want. Please don't chase me away." He Chuan was a little helpless. "Get up then talk." The young girl only slowly raised her head, not daring to get up. At this moment, the neon lights suddenly brightened up a little, shining on her pretty face that had traces of tears on it. The two looked at each other and exclaimed at the same time. It's you." He Chuan was shocked. Wasn't this the girl who had occupied his 50 reincarnation points before he reincarnated? How did she come here? 19 Chapter 19 Chapter 19, Vigilance and Opportunity. Zhang Wenyu was also very surprised. After failing the reincarnation, she left the school disheartened. Her parents had gone to great lengths to find a job as a secretary for a reincarnator. They had even told her to cherish this opportunity. The other party was a young talent highly regarded by the coalition government. As long as she was highly regarded by the other party, it would not be a problem for her to reverse her fate. However, she did not expect that this young talent was actually an outcast that she had once bullied by relying on her family background's advantage. For a moment, Zhang Wenyu had mixed feelings in her heart. We both participated in the same reincarnation assessment, why was he the one who successes and not me? Why was he able to obtain such a good living environment? To live in such a luxurious mansion? Jealousy and envy mixed together. But what followed was a deep fear. She had offended He Chuan before, and now she was under him. Whether this rare job could continue was entirely up to him. If she wanted to continue to stay here and enjoy a high salary, she could only seek the forgiveness of this man in front of her. Zhang Wenyu spoke slowly. "Sir He Chuan, I was insensible and offended you before, so I apologize to you right now. I'm sorry. If you still have resentment in your heart, feel free to vent it on me. You can ask Wenyu to do anything you want." He Chuan chuckled and didn't say anything. He pinched a round spirit fruit between his fingers and put it into his mouth. This thing was quite delicious. It was juicy and sweet. Zhang Wenyu was very uncertain when she saw He Chuan's movement. It seemed that she had to do something more practical to prove her determination. But what should she do? She suddenly lowered her head to look at her carefully selected lace dress. After hesitating for a long time, she finally gritted her teeth and raised her hand to brush her shoulders. Without the support of the shoulder strap, the dress fell down along the curves of her body. Only her underwear was left to cover her body, which made her look even sexier. "What are you doing?" He Chuan's voice suddenly sounded. "Waiting for you to take a bath." Zhang Wenyu was so nervous that she couldn't speak. Her nails were embedded into her thighs. He Chuan rolled his eyes. "I'm not a disabled person that I need help to take a shower." Then you. Zhang Wenyu was a little uncertain about He Chuan's attitude. "Put on your clothes." He Chuan said casually, "Tell me about your reincarnation process." "Oh, okay." Zhang Wenyu was still a little reserved. After putting on her short dress, she sat by the bathtub. In the end, He Chuan rolled his eyes again. "What are you sitting here for? Are you trying to take advantage of me? Sit further away." Zhang Wenyu didn't dare to make a sound and retreated far away. After brewing her emotions for a while, she sank into her memories. Then, her calm voice echoed in the darkness. "I've been reincarnated into a spiritual energy recovery world. Humans are facing a doomsday crisis. Only by exploring and using the special energy that suddenly spread out to strengthen themselves can they escape this crisis. Although the difficulty was relatively high, the strength system here was still in the stage of transition. Everyone was on the same starting line, and it was all based on talent. The life template that I met was a little bad, but my talent was not bad. It could be considered to be above the standard. It's a pity that I was too young at that time and couldn't cultivate. If I just waited like this, the geniuses in this world would definitely surpass me by several large realms. If I want to reach B class and pass the test, I definitely can't be too far behind them in terms of combat strength. So, I used the temporary mid-grade talent I brought over to change my family background. I was prepared to use my family's wealth to quickly accumulate cultivation resources when I grew up. But one day, all my family members were killed. This was an accident that wasn't mentioned in the family background story. I was caught off guard. If I hadn't failed the exam and stayed after school that day, I might have died in this accident. After that, the development became a mess. After leaving my family, accidents became more frequent. I finally cultivated to the age of 18 and had a certain level of strength. I made a small name for myself, but in the end, I was targeted by a male cultivator who insisted on dual cultivation with me. Although it was only a reincarnation world, I was still unwilling, so I had a conflict with him and accidentally killed him. His family was very powerful, and there were several experts and prodigy in his family. I was completely no match for them, so I could only conceal my identity and hide to cultivate. But the world is unpredictable, and the first disaster of the end of the world has arrived. The original species on the planet have received a huge increase in mutation due to the recovery of spiritual energy. Their original habitat can no longer meet their needs. They have begun to invade human cities. The strength of the beast tide was much stronger than I imagined. I can't even deal with the weakest demon beasts. Ordinary spells can't even break their skin. I died in the chaotic battle. When the final reckoning came, the human population was reduced by 80%. The losses were heavy. I haven't done anything. My score didn't even reach an E. Sigh. I don't know what I did wrong. It was supposed to be normal at the beginning. How did it suddenly become like this? After saying that, Zhang Wenyu didn't forget to complain. Obviously, she was very dissatisfied with the result of this reincarnation. He Chuan unconsciously frowned as well. Logically speaking, the template obtained through temporary talent was fixed. The disaster that should happen at the right time would happen at the right time, and it would never change. What the reincarnators needed to do was to improve themselves before this, avoid negative events, change their family or their fate, and obtain evaluation points. Just like what this girl said. He Chuan suddenly thought of the post he had just seen in the reincarnator forum. It seemed that it says, during the process of reincarnation, try not to do anything that would attract hatred or influence the decisions of the family. Otherwise, the development of the event might go beyond your imagination. He recalled the girl's arrogant and condescending attitude when she first faced him. He estimated that the former was more likely, and then it magnified through the butterfly effect, then became a massacre. This sudden situation led to the interruption of cultivation resources, causing the subsequent growth to be slow and unable to support the overall situation. With the chaotic development rhythm, it was impossible to obtain a high evaluation during the reincarnation process. Zhang Wenyu's personal experience alerted He Chuan. He could not just act according to the background template. The reincarnation world was full of dangers. If he reincarnated again, it would be difficult to be as smooth sailing as the first time. After all, the deductive system's functionality was not as good as before. It was very unrealistic to rely on this to avoid disaster. Suddenly, a notification came from the reincarnation imprint. You have received a chance to reincarnate. Immediately after, his phone rang. Zhang Wenyu helped him to get it from his room and put it on speakerphone. Then, K Yuan's voice came from inside. He Chuan, the matter of reincarnation has been settled. It could be used on any reincarnation square. If you still need help in the future, just call me directly. Okay, thank you, Mr. K. It's too polite to call me Mr. P. Brother K. Ha ha ha, Brother He Chuan, I'll look for you for a drink some other day. Oh right, are you satisfied with Secretary Zhang Wenyu? Zhang Wenyu, who was holding the phone, could not help but tremble. He Chuan glanced at her, not bad. Hee, I handpicked this. Out of the 300 or so girls who came to register, she's the most beautiful and has the best figure. She's right beside me now. Hey? Didn't the guard say that you've already returned to your room? Oh, I get it, little brother, you're busy. Every moment of the night is precious, I won't bother you anymore. Do. The phone was hung up at lightning speed. 20 Chapter 20 Chapter 20, Second Reincarnation, Another Hellish Start. A few days passed in the blink of an eye. He Chuan stayed at home and did not go out. His daily life was taken care of by the secretary, Zhang Wenyu. He did not know whether it was an illusion or not. After that embarrassing phone call, this girl always dressed sexily and acted frivolously every time she came to see him as if she was deliberately seducing him. He Chuan ignored her. He was more willing to improve himself than to enjoy the beauty. During this time, he had been sorting out the harvest of his first reincarnation. After reviewing the deduction notes, he immersed himself in the knowledge of the reincarnation forum. There were right and wrong contents, and only the deduction system could filter out the correct information. The effect of taking the spirit fruit also showed up at this time. He Chuan clearly felt that his efficiency in using the deduction system had more than doubled. However, there was still a huge gap compared to his first reincarnation who had He Clan's syndrome. If that He Chuan's brain was comparable to a quantum computer, then he was now just an ordinary calculator. It could even be stuck at 8-digit multiplication and division. There were not many ways to improve this. One could either keep taking the spirit fruits or enter the next reincarnation to look for opportunities. Let's just reincarnate. On the night of the 7th day, He Chuan logged out of the forum. After explaining what he wanted to do to the butler, the reincarnator guard drove him to the nearest reincarnation square. Retrieving target's identity. Connecting with the characters of the reincarnation world. Connected successfully. The world you are about to descend into is martial arts world. Do you want to receive the background information? Yes. This time, He Chuan did not hesitate. A large amount of information flowed through his mind. Instantly, he had a rough understanding of the world he was about to reincarnate into. Low-level martial arts world. Looks like there's no need to prepare a temporary talent so as not to affect the score. Let's start the reincarnation. As soon as he said that, endless light engulfed him. The world was spinning again. When He Chuan woke up again, he was already in a dilapidated temple. He looked down. Fortunately, this was not a newborn baby. He was already a 7 or 8-year-old brat. Afterward, more information appeared in his mind. Character background: you were born in a rural family. You were born with no meridians and could not practice martial arts. Your body was extremely weak and will suffer from illnesses every few days. The plague was prevalent in the village and many people were suffering from it. It was difficult for them to recover. In order to avoid being blamed, the county magistrate who manages this area deceived the higher ups and deluded the people. He used the excuse of brewing medicinal soup to treat the illness to lure the entire village to a remote temple outside the city. In reality, he locked everyone in this place and left them to fend for themselves. Your parents could not survive the hunger and illness, and both of them passed away. You became an orphan, and just as you were about to die, the monk in the temple could not bear to see you, a little child dies, so he brought you along. Even though it was hard for him to survive, he was still very good to you. Every day, he gave you more than half of the food that he gained hard, Very good, it was another hellish start. Very much to his taste. He Chuan stretched his body and began to familiarize himself with his own situation. Crack! His bones and joints rang. Accompanied by a feeling of pain or numbness, he immediately gave up the idea of continuing to move. This was born with no meridians. Too weak. As weak as a chicken. This was really out of the question. He seriously suspected that he wouldn't be able to walk halfway when his bones suddenly couldn't bear the weight of his body and broke in the middle. So he Chuan closed his eyes and connected his mind to the reincarnation mark. There were 3 things stored in it. Deduction notes, gene reagent, perfect version, and heavenly Deo simulation. Use heavenly Deo simulation. He Chuan ordered in his heart. This was something he obtained through reincarnation. It did not count as a foreign object and would not affect the final score. Soon, pieces of information appeared in his mind. This was a simulation of his future life. The story was very long. He was now more than 7 years old. By the time the simulation reached the age of 9, the sky had already become dark. At night, in these ancient times in the open fields of the countryside, there would occasionally be wild beasts. It was even more dangerous in this remote place. Just as He Chuan was considering whether to stop the simulation first, the story of the age of 9 ended and he turned 10. The story only lasted for a few seconds before the last line of words appeared in front of his eyes. You're dead. He Chuan felt a chill on his back as if he had seen the end of his life. He would die in 2 more years? What kind of joke was this? Suddenly, a wrinkled hand pressed on his shoulder. He Chuan was shocked. He turned around only to find that it was the monk who had brought him along. The wind is strong at night. Don't stand at the door, let's go back. Yes, master. He Chuan nodded obediently and perfectly blended into his current persona. The monk closed the dilapidated temple door and blocked it with wood. Then, he brought He Chuan back to his house. On the way, they passed by a large hall. It was the place where they worshipped Buddha in the temple. The place that was supposed to be permeated with a solemn atmosphere was now filled with men and women in shabby clothes. He Chuan coughed from time to time. In his eyes, it was the constant interaction between the viruses. He did not take any precautions and slowly walked through the crowd. Everyone here was infected with the plague. No one was spared. It did not matter whether they were blocked or not. Fortunately, the mortality rate of the disease was not high. It was just torturing. Otherwise, they would not have 2 years to live. The monk returned to his residence and took out half of the broken pancake from the corner of the stone bed. He tore off a small piece with his cracked hands. After that, he took out the grey bamboo tube hanging on the wall and handed it to He Chuan. He Chuan had long been hungry to the point of making gurgling sounds alone. At that moment, he did not dislike it and directly put the pancake into his mouth to chew. In the end, he almost lost his teeth to the hard rock-like pancake. He had no choice but to take a sip of the water in the bamboo tube, soak it slowly, and then swallow it after it softened. During this time, He Chuan accidentally drank 2 more mouthfuls of water. Who would have thought that the bamboo tube, which was quite heavy when picked up, would actually drunk to the bottom? When he poured it again, only 1 or 2 drops of water remained. He Chuan looked at the monk in confusion. Was eating and drinking so tight now? After being surprised, he felt a little embarrassed. If he drank all the water, what should the monk do? The monk did not speak. The corners of his mouth curled up into a smile as if he wanted to tell He Chuan that it was okay, but it looked a little ugly. He silently tore off a cake that was not even the size of a finger and slowly put it into his mouth. After that, he climbed onto the head of the bed and sat cross-legged in meditation, silently reciting the scriptures in his heart. Sigh. He Chuan saw it and sighed slightly in his heart. This reincarnation seemed to be more difficult than he had imagined. That's it for this batch of chapters. If you enjoyed the story, stick around for more. Subscribe and join me in exploring even more light novel worlds. Have a favorite novel you'd love to hear? Share your suggestions, and you might see them in the listener's choice section. See you in the next one.